Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who are in it for the long haul, I apologize for hearing my same spiel a couple times in a row. But for the rest of you, welcome to day 3 of this year's Senior Project Festival. For those that don't know me, I'm Annie Palladino, one of the Senior Project Coordinators, along with Robin Jacobs. We have 4 wonderful presentations today. But before we get started, I'd like to give a brief picture of the senior projects as a whole. Grade 12 is the final step in our students' journey at Seattle Waldorf School. They stand on the edge of adulthood, ready to step into independence and yet still navigating their place in the world. The senior project is designed to help students begin to bridge this gap, asking them to stand in front of the school community as an individual. Students must design a project that forces them to pursue an area of interest, new or old, that will stretch their abilities mentally, physically, and/or emotionally. The class of 2022 have thus spent much of the last year working on their senior projects, building, researching, creating, learning, and, of course, worrying. I say this not to disparage their process. Indeed, worrying about a project that we care deeply about is often a hallmark of an endeavor worth doing. We worry it won't be enough, we worry others won't understand, and above all, we worry that we may fail. Our seniors go through all of these emotions and more every year. It's a deeply human journey. When we ask them at the end of March to stand in front of their community and share what they have learned, it is both a moment of pride and one of humility. They share their individual accomplishments as well as their own private moments of learning and disappointment. The best presentations are vulnerable, authentic, and help us to understand something unique and truthful about the student. It takes a great deal of introspection and a healthy dose of courage, and the class of 2022 have met that challenge with their usual verve. Today's presentations have been prepared and rehearsed over the last month during a special morning lesson block. Each presentation includes a brief overview of why the topic was chosen, how the students went about engaging with the topic, what they learned about the topic, and most importantly, what they learned about themselves. After each speech, the student will open things up for questions from you, the audience. Today, we will hear from Nuradin, Ryan, Sierra, and Piper. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Nuradin.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nuradin Bhatti, and I am a senior here at Seattle Waldorf High School. Before I begin my project, which is real estate development, let me tell you a story about myself. Now, from the age of 14 to this moment, I would say I had become a pretty good musician. After trying one hobby after another, I started to get a grasp of the guitar and later a number of other instruments. It was at this point in my life where I found something that inspired me. When I played, I could feel myself drifting away, and I experienced the flame of passion for the first time. Eventually, this hobby led me to start writing songs and then present those songs as my 8th grade project. For many years, I thought this was all I was meant to be, but then my life changed.
Hello, dudes. I am in line for one of the biggest auditions I've ever had, American Idol. This is just the line, if you're asking. Anyway, wish me luck. Thanks. Bye.
A few years ago, leading up to my audition with American Idol, I found my passion for music beginning to dwindle. Prior to the big day, I had to fill out a form which presented some deeply personal questions that I was rather uncomfortable sharing. I asked myself if this was something I really wanted. I remembered the stories I heard about how people were working at jobs they hate just to get by. It was at this point that I realized that it wasn't my desire to become a great musician, but to live independently and be financially free. Over time, I realized I didn't have to work all day to make someone else's dream a reality, but that my life could be fuller. I knew then that I could work for myself and make my own visions reality. Since then, I made my decision to become an entrepreneur. My first step towards furthering my career was building a foundation of knowledge. I enrolled in an online course pertaining to entrepreneurship from the Wharton School of Business, and I started to gain some insight on how to start a successful company. I struggled a little in the beginning, understanding the content, but eventually I passed all the tests and earned my certificate in entrepreneurship basics. Deciding I wanted to make a name for myself by building my own company, I discovered a newly found love of learning and life. However, while the flame of passion within burned bright, I experienced some roadblocks along the way. I thought in order to be successful, I had to think of a revolutionary business idea that would be almost completely irreplaceable. In other words, I thought I had to make the next Amazon.com. The crushing weight of these thoughts flooded my mind for almost a year and a half. However, I noticed myself looking too far ahead. I had already forgotten that every great entrepreneur started by finding a field they wanted to work in. With that, I decided to pick an industry that interests me, and I chose to pursue real estate as my career. Originally, I saw this as a way to build financial security, but as I continued researching, I learned more about the additional need for housing, especially here in Puget Sound. With a newly discovered desire to create financial independence and a keen interest in the real estate industry, I took the time to work with Winston Young, the managing director at Vibrant Cities, in order to understand what it means to be a commercial real estate developer, as well as the different aspects of development, operations, and investment. When I first met Mr. Young, I was a little nervous to speak with him at first. However, as we continued discussing my idea for my project, I found it was really easy to talk to him about this, and I was impressed with how experienced he was in real estate. After college applications were complete, we started meeting regularly via Zoom. During our first lesson, as we discussed what I actually knew about real estate, I was a little intimidated by not knowing what to say. It made me realize how uneducated I was about a field I thought I was passionate about. However, despite my fallbacks, Mr. Young helped me comprehend the ins and outs of real estate development. While I cannot yet call myself an expert, I feel I have developed a foundation of knowledge that could jumpstart my career. Here's what I learned about the real estate market of Puget Sound. Local real estate here in Seattle is without question remarkably expensive. My first task was to research further into why that is, and I learned about how Puget Sound was dealing with a crisis. At this point in time, the pressures on real estate are affecting the supply of housing as well as the demand for housing. The supply side of the market is dependent on inventory. This refers to how many housing units are available for sale or rent and is connected to the overall production of real estate. With that said, when the supply is high, there are a lot of available housing units, and there are a lot of units being built, and therefore, prices are lower. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, when supply is low, there are very few units to buy or rent, and there are very few units being built, and therefore, there is not enough real estate available. This causes prices to rise in order to sell to the highest bidder. In addition to the property itself, supply also depends on human resources. Not only does the supply side of real estate require people for construction, but it is also important to have engineers who can set up the electrical system, plumbing, and overall make sure that everything about the property is in working order. In addition to people required to build, design, and create, it is just as important to have people who inspect the property being sold or rented out. These people are responsible for checking the integrity of the structure of the housing unit and making sure that everything about the property is serving its function and will not pose any safety issues. In the current housing crisis of Puget Sound, this is one of the factors that control the supply side of the real estate market, as there are not enough fire marshals who do final building inspections to keep up with the volume of construction. Lastly, the supply side of real estate is also dependent on the materials and the availability of the materials. It's not just about the components that make up the property, but there are also the tools necessary to put everything together and to provide the structural integrity of the house. In the context of the local housing crisis, there is a concrete strike taking place in Seattle, and due to that, construction has been put on hold on many housing and infrastructure projects, and the housing supply is shrinking. As I learned about the supply shortage of real estate, I kept thinking to myself that this was getting a little complicated for a novice like myself. Additionally, learning what's affecting the housing market, it just makes me think that our government needs to start taking initiative when it comes to inspection or anything else related to the real estate market. Now, let's have a look at the demand side of real estate. As you probably guessed, the demand side of housing refers to the number of people looking for a housing unit. Like any industry, when demand for real estate is high, prices climb immensely, in which only a select number of people can afford a housing unit. On the other hand, when demand for real estate is low, prices go down. In Seattle, there are a lot of people moving into the city for high-paying jobs, and therefore the demand for housing increases. In fact, one of the reasons why housing is so expensive in this area is that some of the biggest companies are based here in Washington State, some of which include Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, as well as Costco. The fact that there are a lot of high-paying jobs here in Puget Sound raises housing prices to a point where, as of 2021, the median net worth of Seattle area homeowners is near $1 million. If there were fewer jobs, or if companies started to leave the area, people would start to move out, and the demand for housing would decrease. The limited number of housing units as there are in our area is also due to something called zoning laws. Essentially what these do is control what kind of housing can be built on a certain area of land, and these legalities vary depending on different places. To put this into context, Medina zoning laws dictate that only single-family homes can be built on any one lot of land. Therefore, units such as apartments, condos, or any multi-unit building is off limits. To add to this, borrowing money is historically easier than it has ever been in previous years. What this means is that even more people can afford higher-priced housing units. Being an entrepreneur, one needs to find a need and figure out the best solution to address it. After researching the housing market of Puget Sound and the factors that control the abundance and shortage of supply, I realized this problem was going to be harder to fix than I thought. A real estate developer is a person or a company responsible for building or renovating homes, offices, retail centers, or industrial sites. These projects can take vacant land or obsolete buildings and turn them into new businesses and homes. However, it is important to be aware that developers have to consider a number of factors outside the property itself. As a real estate developer, zoning laws control what kind of projects we can actually do. As mentioned before, zoning laws dictate that in many areas of Puget Sound, we cannot build anything other than single-family housing units on any one lot of land. When it comes to the housing shortage, the zoning laws sometimes do not make it easy to address this issue. Part of being a real estate developer means working with the law in which we can legally do different types of projects, where we can create more housing units on one lot of land. Other laws regarding real estate refer to landlord and tenant relationships. As a society, we need to balance fair housing laws that protect the rights of tenants with laws that create incentives for landlords to provide housing. As a tenant, basic rights include full function of household appliances, non-discrimination, security, right to access, and right to repairs and maintenance. On the other side, the landlord should have the right to collect rent, to have protection of property, and the right for eviction if payments fail. When it comes to the relationship between landlord and tenant, I believe in these rights. However, even if we made this happen, I imagine the relationship between both parties could get messy at one point or another. If, say, a tenant is receiving their paycheck late and the landlord evicts them for not paying on time, things start to get complicated. With that said, we do need to balance fair housing laws for the rights of both tenants and landlords, but with all the factors outside of the transaction itself, I imagine protecting these rights will pose a challenge. Another important part of real estate development is raising capital and financing different projects. In addition to understanding what resources are needed, we need the money to afford such big ventures. chances are we don't have $5 million for the construction of a single-family home, let alone $100 million for an entire apartment building. With that being said, we need to either raise the money on our own or we have to get money from investors. This is especially important because the more investors participate in the market, the more housing units there are available. There are multiple ways to invest in real estate, and financing is different depending on what type of investing one is getting into. The most basic form of real estate investment is a primary homeowner. In this instance, someone buys a single-family home via mortgage payments to the bank. You shouldn't just invest in any house. You want to do this if you predict the value of the property to go up in a matter of years. At this point, you can sell the house for a higher price and not only pay off the mortgage, but make a significant profit. The next investor type is the primary homeowner with rental. This is similar to a primary homeowner in which an investor buys a house through mortgage payments, but in addition to owning the house, they rent out a piece of the property. With this, the investor can make some extra income that offsets the mortgage payment. Now, here's where things get interesting, in which an investor can use real estate to make some substantial income. In this instance, someone buys a property, same as a primary homeowner. However, instead of living in the property, they rent it out to someone else. In this form of investing, the owner of the property makes a consistent stream of income. This next form of real estate investment is relatively well known and is more short-term when it comes to its purpose. This is where an investor will buy an older house and put some extra money into renovation or overall improvements. This way, the value of the property increases and can now be sold for a higher price than originally paid for. The silent investor is where someone puts in is a limited partner in a real estate investment, in which they put in a sum of money towards the project, but are not responsible for maintenance whatsoever. Talking about these different types of investments with Mr. Young, I was impressed by how many ways there were to get started in real estate. Learning all of this in a single session, it was a lot to take in. However, I was relieved that there was more than one way I could go about the beginning phase of becoming a real estate developer. If I had to pick one of these investor types as my favorite, I would say that owning income-producing property sounds the most fun. However, I think to become a good real estate developer, taking an older house and making it better via renovation would be a good place to start. According to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, an affordable home is one that can be paid for by 30% or less of a tenant's income. Alternative to building more housing units, there are other ways to address affordable housing needs. In most cases, this is done through subsidization by the government. For example, during the pandemic, the HUD had given out money to people who otherwise couldn't afford shelter. When it comes to developers working in legal matters, there is this law in Washington state called the Multifamily Tax Exemption, or MFTE. This is where developers have their taxes reduced for a limited time in exchange for having a number of units at a reduced rental cost. The MFTE is about affordable housing, and it provides an incentive for developers to provide cheaper housing units. Outside government intervention, there is a way to make housing more affordable. We do this by changing policies on how we make housing available. One example of this would be rent control, a mechanism that limits how much landlords can charge their tenants. However, according to Mr. Young, the problem with this model is that it does not address the need for new potential housing. It just creates a bigger divide between has and has not, and therefore it is unsustainable. Thinking about my own perspective on this model, I completely agree with him. While making affordable housing is a big issue, there is also the need to balance the supply versus demand ratio. So in my opinion, rent control can only do so much. Learning from a real estate developer firsthand, I understand that this industry is going to be a big step to get to after high school. I may not be able to start on it right away, but as I venture off into a new phase of my life, I plan to develop some important financial skills. In college, I will probably want to study the numbers behind real estate trends, lending rates, and reading financial statements, which include income statements and balance sheets. It will also be beneficial for me to take some basic accounting and finance courses, as I will need to practice tracking money and make sure that I use my assets wisely. But more importantly, I will need to gain the ability to manage a team who is responsible for different processes, people, and systems. How I will gain these skills: I could volunteer to shadow a broker or a property management company. Although, to be fair, there is only so much I can invest into this. But there is no one way into real estate development. People can come from anywhere into this industry. However, skills that could come in handy in this field include finance, accounting, legal, property management, banking, operations, as well as business development. Just as there is no one way into real estate development, there is no one answer to addressing the housing crisis. In any circumstance, it requires a multifaceted approach and change from lots of different people, including government, suppliers, developers, landlords, renters, homeowners, etc. Everyone has to pitch in to address the housing crisis. And while it is a long road, I believe it's possible. Learning what it's like to be a real estate developer, I kept thinking to myself that I had a long way to go. Regrettably, my desire to go into real estate is challenged by the obstacles it presents. I keep thinking to myself that I might not be the one who changed the world of real estate. However, I understand that nothing great is ever achieved by going the easy route. I also understand that in this point in my life, I don't necessarily have to commit to anything. As of now, I see a world of possibilities in which I can achieve financial independence. Maybe I'll change the world, maybe I won't. But I hope that one day I can look back and know that I made something of myself. Thank you for hearing my presentation, and thank you to Mr. Young and all who supported me to making this project possible. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you. Okay, any questions? Yes, Piper?
I was wondering how you met your mentor.
Yeah, I probably should have gotten into that. So my father actually introduced me to Mr. Young, and during November, he took the time to schedule a meeting at our house, and we started talking about my project, as I mentioned before. Ryan?
Do you think that the housing crisis can affect the homeless crisis in Seattle?
I believe it can. Oh, sorry. The question was, can the housing crisis affect the homeless crisis here in Seattle? And I believe yes. Sage?
Kind of a hard question, but do you see like the high prices of real estate in Seattle possibly going down in the future, like in the near future?
The question was, do I see housing prices in Seattle going down in the future? And to be honest, that's a tough question to answer. I can't actually, there's no real way to predict where that's going to go. The best you can do is analyze the trends and predict a downtrend or an uptrend. Ms. Stevens?
After completing this project, do you still think real estate development is the best path forward for you, or will you look for other options?
Well, like I said in the beginning, there's a world of possibilities in which I see myself creating financial independence. But yes, real estate does have a lot of perks to it, which include passive income, because what's the point of money if you don't have time to enjoy it? But yes, there are a number of other industries I'm considering, including renewable energy and financial aid. Yes?
Have you looked at any other like places in the world that you would be interested in doing real estate besides Puget Sound?
The question was, did I look at any places other than Puget Sound for the real estate market? And the answer is no, regrettably. To be fair, that like it's best, according to my mentor, it's best to be local in terms of your real estate career because you know it on a more personal level. But there is a world of real estate opportunities outside of Puget Sound. Is that everything? Oh, Mr. Sutherland.
Can you have a map about, like I said, single-family homes and mixed zones?
Yeah.
Are you, I think this is happening, are you aware of like, maybe like at the city level, maybe different like changes to those zone laws because they, people want to solve the housing crisis, and then you could almost like sometimes leverage like, hey, this is single family only, but if you're gonna build affordable housing, then you could do it to incentivize affordable housing. I guess that's one thing, and then I just, maybe we can still tie that in, but if you're interested at all in like, getting experience, to say, working with an affordable housing group that's been, filming with that angle as a way to get experience.
That is a good question, Mr. Sutherland. And honestly, I was not really aware of this changing in zoning laws. I'm a novice, so I can only go so far. And as for going into affordable housing groups, that sounds interesting, but right now I need to really solidify my path into my career. Anyone else? Thank you. Up next, I would like to introduce Ryan.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I've done my project on labor unions. Oh, I'm gonna move this up a little bit. And the current push in America. For the project, I started off by following and researching some of the history around labor unions, and then I transitioned into looking at some of the strikes and labor movements today, and then finished by interviewing some people who were connected with unions. I always grew up not really understanding poverty. I guess this could be a product of going to a small private school in an affluent part of Seattle. And even though I was unaware of how much socioeconomics plays a part in a society, I was always raised on the general belief that we should be pushing towards equality. For a while, I really questioned how we could actually achieve economic equality, from the workers to the business owners. I explored other avenues of how we can achieve this equality, but from what I've deduced, I think labor unions are the first and arguably the most important step. While most of you may know what a labor union is, I will give my definition of them. Labor unions are a tool to collectively bargain for higher wages, better working conditions, and bring a direct form of democracy to the workplace. By collectively deciding not to go to your work, you can effectively shut down. This will give the ability for you to demand for more. I think it is interesting in the, quote, free world, we talk about democracy and how important it is. In fact, we even give spreading democracy as a reason to invade other countries. But if you ever suggest bringing democracy into more places of our lives, you're called a radical. You're called un-American. On average, adults spend 43% of their life in the workplace. In that workplace, workers have little to no control over pretty much anything. That is, though, the higher you go in the company, the more say you will have. I will admit, sometimes democracy allows for people into power that really shouldn't be. Sometimes we vote for things that may not be in our best interest. I mean, look at our elections. We are pretty much divided in who we think should lead our country. But I would take the option of democracy rather than having a dictator or having a monarch. I mean, yes, it is possible that that dictator could be friendly, they could care for their people, but what if the dictator's not good? What if they directly go against their disciples? I would want democracy. In fact, I would want a voice. This is what the union does for the workplace. It gives the power to the workers. It gives a voice for them to stand up against their unelected employers. I knew that doing unions for my project would be perfect because it would give me an excuse to do research on them, which was something I was already doing as a tool of procrastination. And I found that in sporadic bursts, I would dig into one specific historical event, learn everything about it, then realize I was procrastinating and that I needed to go back to do my homework. Labor organizing dates all the way back to feudal peasant uprisings, where they would fight against their lords for better working conditions and better pay. America didn't see labor organizing until the mid-19th century. We call this time the Industrial Revolution, giving way to harsher and lower paying jobs due to an increase of relatively easy labor in places like factories. Unfortunately, children were a valuable asset in the factory, which would give them extremely dangerous and damaging jobs like chimney sweeping. Plus, they didn't have to get paid as much. An increase of production of coal was needed to run these cities and factories, and infrastructure was being produced at a rapid rate. But the only people who actually profited off of this boom were the owners of the factories and the corporations. Workers around the world were upset with how they're being treated. This resulted in revolutions, labor organizing, accumulating into what we call the Red Scare. In the fear of a socialist revolution, a series of worker uprisings around the world in the 20th century, that's what the Red Scare is. In fear of a socialist revolution in America, the government attempted to shut down all labor movements. But they decided to do this by force. So this pitted American workers against the government, accumulating into conflict. One of the biggest civil uprisings, actually the biggest civil uprisings today since the American Civil War, was in the Battle of Blair Mountain. In the hills of West Virginia, in August of 1921, 10,000 armed Union coal miners descended on Logan County to demand for more pay, better housing, and better working conditions. But unhappy with this, the Logan County Sheriff called on the National Guard and the U.S. Army. After dropping homemade bombs out of their planes on the miners, alongside with most of the miners really being veterans of World War I and didn't really want to fight against their people they sat in trenches with, they decided to surrender. One interesting fact about this is that the miners would tie red bandanas around their neck. They did this to differentiate themselves between the miners and the army. But what came out of this was a nickname, which was redneck, which was given to mostly poor white men. The government, knowing that to prevent a revolution, they would have to comply with some of the demands. So FDR's Great New Deal was the first piece of legislation that actually protected unions. So now, I'm going to name off some of the things we can thank unions for. Abolishment of child labor, the 5-day work week, minimum wage, employer-based health care, the 8-hour workday, overtime pay, the 40-hour work week, family medical leave, unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, and much, much more. Learning the background of unions sparked an infatuation of getting to know more about their history, especially events like Blair Mountain. There's something about the image of a coal miner that of them risking everything that really sparks an intriguing heroism. Unfortunately, since the 60s, our union rates have slowly, steadily dropped to just from 30% to just a meager 10%. But since the pandemic, workers have been faced with some challenging times, which resulted in a general unhappiness with their work. Due to the pandemic, union rates have slowly risen. For this project, I started off by watching what was happening with the Kellogg and John Deere strikes. The John Deere strikes started last October after John Deere reported their numbers from that fiscal year. Now, something to point out, though, was that they were told before that this year was going to be tough, it was COVID, and so that they couldn't really expand on their pay that much. But as the year report came out, it was a record-breaking year for them. In fact, it was a 60% increase from their previous year in 2013, which is a $5.9 billion come out. Now the CEO salary got 160% increase. Now this is during COVID when most of the workers were barely getting by. So under the protection of the United Auto Workers Union, John Deere strikers went on strike. A similar thing happened with Kellogg, but it was more pointed towards the two-tier pay system which they had, which gave them ability to not pay the newer workers as much as the older ones. After 5 weeks of striking, John Deere signed a resolution contract with their workers. Each employee would get a 10% pay increase, an $8,500 bonus, and a boost to the pension, giving retired workers $250 more per month. And this is along with some other benefits. For Kellogg, corporate Kellogg threatened all 1,400 strikers, saying they would let them go if they didn't get back to work. This sparked an immense backlash from the public, with even figures like Joe Biden speaking out. So they decided to retract their threat. Then, in late December, after an entire 77 days of no work, the Kellogg strikers came to an agreement. Kellogg would abolish the two-tier pay system which they had, which would bump everyone up to the same pay, plus they would get an extra $1.1 an hour. Around the same time in December, the first ever American Starbucks petition to become a union. This sparked a movement in Starbucks stores all over America. These Starbucks baristas wanted the possibility to have a democratic say in how their workplace was being run. Now, to clarify, to petition for a union means you have to have at least 30% of the votes, or 30% of the employees saying they would actually want to collectively bargain, and then you send that petition to the local NLRB. And then to unionize, you hold an election at your workplace, and you need about like 50% of the votes. Unfortunately, back to Starbucks. Unfortunately, this caused Starbucks to panic. And then they sent higher-ups to the stores. Since then, Starbucks has had a very strong anti-union campaign. But this campaign has actually been pretty unsuccessful. There's been over 150 stores that petitioned in America. And 8 out of the 9 stores that have actually counted votes have ratified to become a union, and that is even including one in Seattle. I've been following the SB Workers United page, Twitter page, which is a union, to get updates. And every time I look, there are like 2 or 3 new petition stores from that day, which is a lot. One of my favorite things about this project was actually being able to interview people who are associated with unions. I would have loved to talk to a union representative, but due to it being kind of a busy time for unions, I wasn't actually able to get that done. But here are some of the highlights from my interviews. I was able to talk to former teacher, Connie, who was a school teacher for her entire career. She talks very fondly about her experience being in a teachers union. There are uses for a union when you're not currently striking. What Connie describes is a completely loving, completely inclusive community that's main purpose is to take care of the people within it. It is hard to explain, but she describes how being in a union actually gave people a greater sense of belonging. Plus, the benefits of being in it were incomparable. You did have to pay union dues, which is a thing, but that was in case of a strike. Plus, a lot of the programs the school ran on weren't actually funded through the state itself, but were funded through the union dues because of lack of funding. Connie also describes a big reason people wanting to be under a union is protection, whether it is legal protection, protection from getting fired, protecting from the school, or protecting the school itself. There's a sense of security that really comes out of this. I also interviewed Pat Hayes, a former president at Blue Cross Blue Shield, CEO of Sutter Health, and executive at Kaiser Permanente. He had a much different perspective on unions, as he has spent most of his career trying to avoid them under his leadership. He shared a very interesting perspective on the culture around unions in business school, that there's this kind of unspoken bias against unions, and how if you, a businessman, has a union under you, that you've kind of failed, that you really don't want that because it's like shows a sign of weakness. So corporations will campaign against them because they have the thought that there's generally no need. I think that there is a big difference in view between the purpose of a union, between the workers and the employees. Pat also describes having a union in the workplace can really slow everything down. Plus, it can kind of create a barrier between communication between the unions and the employers, which can make difficult communication. But on the other end, that communication barrier can actually make it better for the workers. I also interviewed Darren, a union lawyer. His law firm represents unions from all over America, from the Starbucks unions that are growing to airplane pilots. His view on the growing movement and the growth is that there really isn't, he actually surprised me, what his belief is. He has been representing unions for a long time and has seen memberships surge and resurge. I really like this dichotomy he describes between the union lawyers and the corporate union lawyers, where the corporate union lawyers are essentially fighting against their own and the union lawyers' jobs, because without the union, neither of them would actually have a job. His perspective on the current surge in memberships is that there's truly nothing new, and that after a while, union membership rates will slowly continue to drop, until ultimately, there will be no more unions in America. American corporate capitalism will suffocate any chance of a movement that will directly challenge its hegemonic power. Now, this thought scares me. The history of American labor is the history of the union. If we lose the union, we lose any prospect of economic equality. After his interview, it almost makes me think that this growing movement today is the union's last push, and in a hope that it could relight the movement that from the past. But the truth is, we could be losing our democracy. The workers are losing their voice. But who will stand up if they take away the weekend? What if one day there's no more health care? I mean, without the pressure of the union, these things could be taken away a lot quicker than you may think. Okay, this may seem like a roller coaster. At one end, great stuff is happening in the world of organizing. But this interview shares a very pessimistic view of what's going on. I also felt this roller coaster. But it is important to keep optimism. When you're fighting for something you care for, optimism will keep that fighting well, even if the odds are stacked against you. I would actually say that I've been successful in staying optimistic through this project. I don't know, but there's just something in the Starbucks union in particular that really gives me hope. It really isn't often that a business in the service industry actually succeeds in labor organizing. So I really hope we can all hold this optimistic view and keep fighting for what we care for. One value that I took away from this project was, in its subsequent research, is that I will never cross a picket line. Now, a picket line is a line where the strikers are protesting in front of the workplace. What it means to go cross that picket line means you would actually go into that workplace itself. I learned that crossing that picket line can ruin a strike and is just disrespectful for the workers. Okay, now before I end, I just want to say an old union hymn. United we bargain, divided we beg. I want to thank Pat, Connie, Darren for the interviews. I want to thank you, Mom, for the support. I want to thank you, Dad, for setting me up the interview with Darren. I want to thank everyone who has given me feedback and support. And lastly, I want to thank you guys, the audience. Are there any questions? Sage.
I am actually not sure what your ideas about your path in the future are, but wherever you end up, are you planning on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to scare off anyone who wants to hire me, but I do want to be a part of a union. My hope is that eventually, don't want to scare anyone, but I join a job and I could help that place unionize, or I could hopefully join a job that can do that. But I mean, I'm not going to choose a job just because it's a union or not, because that does give the opportunity to test the waters, see if someone wants to join a union, and then go through with that process. But I think, yeah, I mean, my hope is that I can be a part of a union itself. Any insight of why unions' rates have dropped? I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think one of it, I was just talking to Anderson about, there was this, during like the 70s, there was a lot of a shift in the union between it being focused around, opposed to being like a labor movement, to more bureaucracy in general, and more about like protecting the people who, like a little more corruption in the unions and protecting the corporate owners and things like that. And then also I think that there is the general culture in America that unions aren't necessarily helpful, and that we will constantly be trying to push them away because they actually challenge wealth. In the back. Ms. Rasmussen. Mhm. Mm-hmm. Clarify the question. Have I seen people talk about how the Toyota model of incorporating unions into the workplace a little more and more of a co-op? Not really. I actually haven't heard about the Toyota model, but I do think that in places like Europe, it is a lot more like the union. Like every job is unionized, including like everyone to like the business owners. So with that, it's normalized. Everyone is in a union, and so there's a lot more cooperation between everyone. That kind of thing is harder in America because of the culture, but I haven't actually seen. I don't know if that would work in America or not, or if that is something that is happening a lot. Ms. Palladino?
Were there unions or sort of work types that you came across in your research where you felt like a union was not helpful or not important?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a gradient of like helpfulness, I guess, generally with a union. But I mean, if you look at things like a cop union, a lot of times they're not helpful in the same way that most unions are, where they're more protecting, not really like the workers themselves, but more just protecting cops. And that's not really helpful in the same way. And then also when I talked to Pat, he does talk about how there can be some corruption in the unions, and especially with something like medical, there's maybe not as much of a use as there may be like auto workers and things like that. So I think that there are jobs that are more important to have a union, like a factory definitely needs a union, but I think there can be a problem if, I don't know, like a cop union can definitely hurt in a way. Ms. Jacob? Well, because I think that there's what got me into this research? I think that there is. It's hard for me to put down a moment where I'm like, oh my God, I love this idea. I think that what kind of got me into this idea of politics is kind of maybe it's just COVID and seeing how the workers are being affected, and then seeing how unions have been propped up, and then how they've kind of been benefiting. But I mean, honestly, I can't name a single moment. I guess maybe seeing the John Deere strikes happen was like, okay, I really want to see this happen. I'm really supporting this. In fact, I even donated to them, and yeah. What did I learn about myself? I would say I learned that I have a really strong passion for economics, or more like economic equality. I think that I really got into the subject, and the more I dug, the more I loved the culture of it. So like I really got into the music, I really got into the speeches and things like that, and so I really found like almost like a calling in that, and like the inspiration from that. So I think that's something I found for myself.
You had that moment where you talked about how sometimes, frankly for teachers, the union dues end up going to pay for
Yeah.
other programs in the school because they don't have an outside enough way. I wonder if you could talk more about just what that looks like, what's really going on there. And then if you could tie that with like the Wildcat, the name of the Wildcat strikes, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but some of the teachers that like not to just do business with
Yeah, I'm not actually not familiar with that strike. So I don't know really much about it. But sorry, how has union dues? How did that work out with union dues paying for the school programs? I didn't really get too much from that conversation about exactly what they were doing, but it was generally programs to help the teachers. There's like this mentor program which they had, which every teacher would get paired up with an older teacher who was a part of the union, and that wasn't funded through the state, which should have been, but it really wasn't. And then there's just generally like things like, I don't know, getting teachers more books, getting teachers more supplies. Like that is something that either the teachers have to pay for themselves or the union can step in and help them out. Sorry, can you? So less outsourcing of jobs will bring more power to the union. I think yeah. I think that it is important that to bring jobs into America will support the union, because it give places like factories, which we export out to countries that are more developed, less developed, and aren't protected under a union, are oftentimes are exploitative and things like that. And so bringing them into America will give the ability for them to unionize, right? And that will make it so that those products we use, those products that we buy, are more ethically sourced generally. So, and then there's a general thought that if you can, I don't know, shame people, but like, if you're like, hey, are you gonna buy this product made in Indonesia, made by children, or are you gonna buy this union-made product which is ethically sourced, better paying labor, it's better materials? I think that definitely helps. That's a good question. Is there going to be a point where labor unions are going to be necessary if we can achieve economic equality? I think that if that was to happen, that's going to be very far out in the future. It's hard to say. I couldn't say that we could achieve. I think a lot of radical things would have to happen to achieve economic equality. And if we're going the union route, it's going to take an even longer time. And I do think that having unions in the workplace, even if there is economic equality, still gives democracy, right? So it's not just about getting better pay, getting better wages, things like that. It gives you ability to demand for change. So if something's a problem with your workplace, you can change it. You have a vote. So I think there's importance to unions outside of economic equality.
I just wanted to say I love that point you made, that unions bring democracy into everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful, regardless of the position. It also brings people together in a way that empowers them in all areas of life.
Yeah.
I think that when you're talking about like the decline of unions, I have read something interesting that said like in the 60s and 70s, the professionalization of unions,
Mm-hmm.
like unions started to be represented more by lawyers, and so the activism
Yeah.
of the workers themselves was reduced. And I think when you talk about COVID and like mutual aid stuff and empowering workers, that actually is shifting, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why we're seeing this kind of explosion, as you pointed out.
I
Interest in
yeah.
unions again, like to be active is to be part of the union and not waiting for someone else to represent you.
I totally agree, and I think that with the George Floyd riots and protests and things like that, it really showed people the ability that they do actually have a voice, and that if you go out there and you do stuff, that things could happen. So I definitely agree.
When you said other countries are doing a better job than America, what countries could we look to model? What's the top one or two countries? That's who we want to be.
I would say the Nordic countries. I'm not saying that they're going to be perfect, right? There's a lot of problems. If you have more economic equality in one country, that lower paying labor is just pushed to another country. So oftentimes you will still be relying on cheap labor, But I think that it is important to start with getting everyone under a union, like all the Nordic countries. So Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, things like that. Cool. Thank you. Oh yeah. And next we have Sierra.
Hi, my name's Sierra, and today I'll be talking about how I combine sports psychology and website design. For the last 7 years, I've played soccer for multiple different soccer teams, sometimes for more than one at a time. Playing soccer helps me to relieve stress and take out my anger on the other team while doing something I love and spending time outside. Over the years, I began to get injured easily and relatively often. On top of that, when I was around 12 years old, I developed asthma, which has continually gotten worse. Recently, I've become interested in learning how to manage these difficulties, as well as become a better player in general. Sports psychology has helped me to accomplish these goals, and I've learned a lot about how mentality affects sports and life in general. Last May, I was struggling to come up with an idea for my senior project. I was leaning towards working with animals in some way, but I wasn't sure how. Eventually, I started looking at different organizations, like the animal shelter and the zoo, but due to COVID, there weren't very many volunteer or internship opportunities. By September, I was busy with other things and wasn't even thinking about what to do for my project. Around the same time, I began learning about sports psychology for Mr. Anderson's academic research paper. After writing the essay, I found sports psychology was a topic I could use for my senior project, but I wanted to incorporate another aspect into it as well. By the time December rolled around, I still wasn't sure what to do. Then one day, I thought about making a website and realized it could be my senior project. After I started working on the website, I didn't have any content. Looking back at my recent classes, I thought about sports psychology and decided to display my research on my website. This worked out well, and I was happy with the results. In middle school, I wanted a phone, but my parents said no. However, if I did some coding on Khan Academy, they said I could have one. At the time, I didn't know it would be a full 2.5 years of programming before I would finally receive my phone. My dad was very dedicated to this idea and worked with me often as I began to learn how to write code in the computer languages jQuery, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Once I got through the "can I have my phone yet, this is dumb" mindset, I began to feel that I enjoyed learning these new languages. It was fun to create a user interactive page that I built and could try out myself. When I got to high school, I didn't have time to work on coding outside of school anymore, but I ended up taking a coding class for Python my junior year. With yet another computer language, my knowledge of just how much you can do with coding increased, and I saw how simple it would be to build my own website. For the coding aspect of my project, I was hoping to build a website that was functional and looked professional. In the past, I had built websites using my code from Khan Academy, but I never really spent very much time on them. Additionally, I wanted to see how my code would work on the internet and not in a pre-constructed environment. On the sports psychology side, I was looking for ways to focus and improve my game. With these motivators, I was excited to create a project where I was happy with the final product. Sports psychology is a study of how mental health affects sports performance. It helps athletes to improve in many areas, allowing their full attention and energy to be devoted to performing at their best. Physical training is the best and most obvious way to improve at any sport. However, it is important to train mentally as well. Having the ability to focus and tune everything out is a really powerful tool. It takes time to learn, but with practice, you can become a stronger athlete. One of my favorite athletes, Mia Hamm, used sports psychology while playing soccer. Mia Hamm is a 2-time gold medalist who played forward for the U.S. women's national soccer team from 1987 until 2004. I've always looked up to her as she was one of the founding players in the first professional women's soccer league in the United States. Her story inspired me to improve my soccer game and work hard to accomplish my goals. I think I first read her book, Go for the Goal, in 5th grade and finished it in one night. I loved how hard she worked to create a world where girls could play soccer and not just guys. In her book, Mia Hamm talks about how important the mentality side of sports is. She describes how the game of soccer is split about half and half between the mental and physical game. You're almost playing 2 games at a time, and in order to win, you have to win both the physical and the mental game. Last weekend, I went to a soccer tournament in Las Vegas. Usually, I love playing soccer anywhere, but this was not the funnest experience. It was very hot, the refs were terrible, and I had a headache. On top of that, the grass was dead and brown, and every single time the ball rolled across it or I ran, the grass would break off in large amounts and blow into my eyes. As you can see, these conditions were not the best, and I was struggling to play the way I knew I could. This is when I remembered to use some of the techniques I learned while researching sports psychology. Before the game, I decided to visualize. I imagined myself playing simply while relaxed and confident. I then visualized myself working hard to take back the ball if I lost it, even if the other player fouled me and the ref didn't see it. One of my favorite parts about soccer is how physical it is, but I do get hurt a lot. During the game, I reminded myself to continue to play at my hardest and to always get back at a player who injured me on purpose. This might seem counterintuitive, but I promise it is sometimes necessary when I'm kicked in the knee multiple times in a row. However, sometimes the other team is not trying to hurt me on purpose, and I need to calm down in order to not get revenge on them for something they didn't do. This is when I began to take a slow, deep breath and then exhale completely. I would inhale, counting from 1 to 4, hold, and then exhale slowly. This helped to regulate my breathing as well when I was tired. Another way I was able to focus was by resetting. I often make a mistake and become frustrated at myself for it. By telling myself to reset and taking a deep breath, I was able to only focus on the next play and leave what just happened behind. These techniques helped me last weekend, and I scored a game-winning goal after visualizing myself one-on-one with the goalie before the game. I was really happy that I was able to focus and improve because of the techniques I was working on. The first thing I did to build my website was create another account with REPL.com. REPL is an IDE, interactive development environment, that is made up of an editor and a website to display your code. Editor, website. I chose REPL over the hundreds of other editors because it is meant for people who are on the beginner side of learning how to write code. This makes it easier to use. Once I had an account, I began to use REPL to write instructions. On the left-hand side of the page is where you write instructions. The instructions are a series of code that, when typed correctly into the editor, are printed out onto the web page on the right-hand side. For example, for the title on my website, I wrote left angle bracket, H1, right angle bracket, sports psychology, left angle bracket, backslash, H1, right angle bracket, which instructed the browser to display the heading sports psychology on my page. In order to create different pages on my website, I organized my code into files. Each group of instructions for a specific web page were placed into separate files in a column on the left-hand side of the screen. When I clicked on a specific file, that group of instructions would pop up, allowing me to change my website page. Each time I made a change, I could see the modifications of my code by clicking Run at the top of the screen. The Run button saves and displays the changes to the code to the right of the instructions. This is the definition of an IDE because the user is interacting with the editor and the finished page. To show this, I will type in some instructions, click Run, and show how the page changed. So right there, I'm changing sports psychology to Sierra's website. And I hit Run, and it changes up there when I refresh, which the Run refreshes it. If I wanted to see this updated version of my web page online, I can copy the URL at the top of the page into my browser, and my website will show up. In my website, I used 4 languages: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery. HTML, hypertext markup language, is mostly used for putting words onto the page. CSS, cascading style sheet, is used for the appearance of the web page. It can change the color of the letters or the entire web page. JavaScript is for pages that need interaction with users. This could include buttons, drop-down lists, and data entry. jQuery is the newest out of these languages and is similar to JavaScript, except you can do more with fewer instructions. These 4 languages are split into different sections of code, but they work together to form the web page. There are thousands of instructions, and it's pretty hard to have all of them memorized. Because of this, the internet had many helpful resources. One of these was W3 Schools. W3 Schools is a nonprofit company that helps people learn how to code online. They have the syntax of all the different instructions of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as others. By looking at my questions in W3 Schools, they gave me an example of the right way to format my code. This helped to make sure there were no syntax errors and I was writing the commands correctly. Additionally, it showed me some examples of code that I could copy and add in the correct components of my own code. On the far left-hand side of this page, you can see a list of resources relating to the question I looked up. This was helpful in case I had multiple questions about the same topic, as I could just click for more information. Another resource I used was a color picker. By looking up color picker in your browser, you can select any color you want. When you choose a color, the hexadecimal numbers that correspond to the specific pixels that are going to be colored are written below. You can then copy these numbers using CSS, and the entire background can be changed to that exact color, for instance. This was useful because I could change letters or specific sections of my web page to the exact color that I wanted. In addition, I reused some of my code from middle school that I wrote on Khan Academy. These resources helped me to make it faster and easier to write instructions. I organized my website by having multiple pages. On the home page, I wrote a little about myself and a short summary of my research. The second page has the draft of my research before I figured out what I wanted the final product to look like. There's the draft, final product. Another web page was the quiz I made, and the last one contains my final research. The website is made up of these pages, and they are linked together to display that information. By clicking one of the links, it calls that other file of instructions to show up on the screen. This allows the web page to be user interactive. Some web pages don't have this, and all the instructions are in one file. This means that the page is really long and you have to continuously scroll. Having pages with more links makes the website easier to use. I decided to build a quiz because I thought that it would be a good addition to my project. It shows how a web page can be interactive with users other than me. The quiz is written in multiple languages, in particular JavaScript and jQuery, which calculate your correct responses and give you an accurate score. Before my presentation, the QR codes I handed out make it easier to find my web page on your phone. Now, if you'd like, I invite you to take the quiz. You have about 2 minutes. Click the quiz in the top menu bar, hit the check answer button to submit your answers, and see how many you get correct at the bottom. If you have any questions, let me know. Also, I realized recently that it might not work on everyone's phone, and it works on some people, so I apologize. I am working on that. Is it not working? Okay. I can give you a little more time. I enjoyed building a website, and I'm proud of how much I accomplished in such a short time. I don't think I'll pursue software development as a career, as it's more of a hobby to me. I really enjoyed the satisfaction of creating a website that can be viewed online and works without errors. However, it sometimes takes a lot of time and effort, and if I were stressed about having to complete a project, I would not enjoy coding. As for sports psychology, I will continue to use the techniques I've learned in my games and in life because they have been very helpful recently. There's a quote by Mia Hamm that's always stuck with me, and I'd like to share it with you. Somewhere behind the athlete you've become, in the hours of practice and coaches who have pushed you, is a little girl who fell in love with the game and never looked back. Play for her. Thank you so much. I'd like to say thank you to Ms. Palladino and Mix Jacobs for all of their helpful feedback and for staying with me every single time I decided to change my project. A big thank you to my dad for spending so much time teaching me how to write code and for pushing me to continue working on my project when I didn't want to. A last thank you to all of my soccer teams and coaches who I've learned from and who've made me the person I am today. I'd now like to take the time for questions. Yeah, Miss Ailey?
Were
Yeah, it definitely helps somewhat, but then like the mental aspect has effect. Oh, sorry. The question was, has sports psychology helped me with dealing with my asthma? I think I would say it has to a certain extent, but I've definitely had struggled with the mental aspect of having asthma, just as like I can't do this, I can't keep running. And I think that it has helped with that part. Now it's just the physical part of I actually can't keep running. Yeah, Gavin?
How long did it take you to write the code?
How long did it take me to write the code for my project? I'd say, I don't know how many hours, but I did reuse a lot that I'd written in middle school. So I think it took a lot more time then, and then some of it was copied, and then I kind of added on. So I'm not really sure. Yeah, Alma? What was my favorite part of the project? I just really enjoyed like having soccer incorporated into my project and having the sports aspect where I could work on that at the same time. It just felt like something I was more interested in. Yeah. Declan?
Have you read other books about sports psychology, and do you want to take classes in college about sports psychology?
Have I read books about sports psychology, and do I want to take classes in college? I think I do want to take classes in college. I'm definitely interested in it. I'm not sure how much sports I'll be playing in the future, but I definitely am interested to a certain extent. As for books, I really haven't read very many. It was mostly from my research paper, so yeah. Yeah? In the back. Yeah, you. What sports psychology advice would I give out to younger athletes? It's definitely like a big part of the game. Like there's definitely the mental side and the physical side of the game. And I think that it's equally important, and that it should be like, you should really think about it, at least to some extent, because it's a big part of whatever sport you are playing. There's always going to be a mental aspect that is important. So just like acknowledging that and maybe thinking about some ideas with that. Yeah. Yeah, Ms. Stevens?
Has studying sports psychology affected the rest of your life?
Has sports psychology affected my life in any other ways other than sports? I think it has a little bit. I just pay more attention to how I view like the mentality side of just like life in general, and how like what's going on in other ways than just what's happening. So I think it's just brought my attention to what's like other aspects of life, yeah. Ms. Valentina?
You may not have, but in your research, did you see or read about any differences or comparison between team sports and individual sports?
Did I see, wait, sorry, can you say that
In
again?
your research, did you come across any comparison between team sports and individual sports?
Like,
In terms of the sports psychology aspect?
oh, did I see like, did I see any differences between team sports and sports that are on their own with sports psychology? I didn't really run into that as much. I was mostly focusing on like the soccer aspect and other athletes that have used sports psychology to improve, so I'm not really sure. Yeah?
So I'm kind of interested in the visualization and the effectiveness of it. So in your research, did you see it is becoming more popular and also more a tool that's actually very successful in helping athletes improve their game?
How does visualization how effective is it with athletes? I definitely have heard of, like in my research, I noticed that a lot of athletes do use visualization of just like seeing themselves do what they know they can before the game. And they say that it has helped them. So athletes like Russell Wilson and Megan Rapinoe, for the ones that are top of my head, but they have used it and said that it has helped them. So, yeah. Yeah?
Did you use
Sorry, can you rephrase that?
Well, I'm thinking, like, did you go, as you were creating your webpage, were you going to somebody else's webpage to say, I'd like to imitate that, or that's a good idea?
How did I design my webpage, or did I base it off of someone else's? Yes, I did. I had a template for a website, and I just kind of took what parts I wanted from that and added it into mine. Yeah. Okay, next up we have Piper. Good job.
Hello everyone, I'm Piper, and for my senior project, I decided to plan and embark on a backpacking trip through the canyons of Utah. After changing my project more than a few times, I was completely at a loss for how to choose. I could think of so many things I wanted to make or learn about, and so many social issues that needed to be addressed, but nothing felt quite right. With the increasing stress of the shrinking remainder of time, I turned almost unconsciously to the outdoors. All my life, I have sought comfort in the wilderness, whether that be the winding canyons, towering mountains, or simply the swaying branches of trees in my backyard. While many prefer to spend the night in their warm, fluffy beds, I have always felt more at home sleeping under the stars. Deep down, I have known this my entire life, but it is something that I have only truly come to acknowledge this past year. As a kid, I spent my time running down the beaches of Discovery Park in Magnolia, arms spread wide, wind tossing my hair in every direction. Throwing my head back, I would laugh. Laugh because I felt free, because in those moments, I had not a care in the world. I was convinced that maybe, just maybe, one day the wind would pick me up and carry me into the clouds where I could fly with the birds. Spending time outside has always filled me with this freedom and genuine love of life, things that could not be replaced by anything in the world. My childhood of outdoor adventuring has given me the experiences of overcoming challenges, solving problems creatively, and appreciating the many beauties of the world. As I began to notice while working on this project, I am continuously drawn to desert wilderness areas, specifically around the Colorado River. In 2017, when I was in 8th grade, or 7th grade actually, my family drove down to southeastern Utah to meet up with friends and spend a week rafting down the San Juan River, which is a major tributary of the Colorado River. Here are some pictures from my trip. Just a year later, in the spring of 8th grade, my family joined 9 others to raft for 21 days through the majestic Grand Canyon on the Colorado River. This trip in particular contributed to my love for the desert, and by the end of the 3 weeks, I did not want to go home. Over time, my awe and admiration for the deserts and wilderness areas that I have been fortunate enough to travel through has grown. The beautiful curving walls of the desert canyons have a special way of holding me, calming me, and bringing me back to myself. This last year has made it more clear than ever that when life is challenging or stressful, the best thing that I can go do is spend time in the wilderness. Being outside felt like the most reliable and least complex part of my life this year, and it felt like the one thing I could truly always do right. The outdoors gave me a place to escape and find myself again. Longing for an adventure to challenge me and fill my heart with beauty, I began hatching a plan to escape the city. Seeing it as a personal challenge, I decided to put together a backpacking trip, mostly by myself. I hoped to use my previous outdoor trip knowledge from my childhood of adventuring, as well as skills that I'd gained through getting my wilderness first aid and CPR certifications, as you can see here, both of which I had just earned during an intensive 20-hour weekend course. It was my mom who initially encouraged me to get certified. She told me that if I intended on partaking in more wilderness adventures now and in the future, I needed to be better prepared to take care of myself and others. I immediately agreed. I love helping people and am interested in both the outdoors and medicine, so this seemed like a great opportunity to expand my knowledge. As I sat in the classroom with a bunch of cool adults, learning about wound treatment and creative items to use for splints, I really started to consider how I could make my senior project about the outdoors. Most of the content of the class we practiced applying in different scenarios. Half the group was assigned as first responders and left the room where they would return a few minutes later to treat the patients who were sprawled on the floor in strange positions, pretend hiking up some steep cliff, or being swarmed by an angry cloud of bees. As responders, it was our job to assess, treat, and come up with a plan of action based on the needs of the patient and severity of injury. This ranged from reminding the patient to use their inhaler to carrying out an immediate evacuation. Pretty big range, as you can tell. Meanwhile, the patients got to chill out on the floor and make up wildly hilarious stories about how they got hurt. As part of this course, we studied the downward slope of hypothermia, as my instructor called it, practiced CPR on some creepy rubber dummies that I took a picture of, and learned how to take pulse and heart rate, among many other things. After trying unsuccessfully to find my pulse, my partner called over the pair next to us. They could feel it on my neck, but not anywhere on my wrist, and were very perplexed. Finally, our instructor, Maddie, came over, but after a few minutes, even he, the highly trained EMT of over 20 years, could not find my pulse. Laughing, we reached the conclusion that I must be dead. But then the assistant instructor found it in this tiny spot on the side of my wrist, which is apparently a very strange spot, but everyone was very relieved. Maddie told me that never in his life had he been unable to locate someone's pulse. I was the first, and he was very impressed. By the end of the weekend, I was completely exhausted. I lay down on my floor, my homework very much incomplete, and my limbs covered in fake bruises and wounds. But I had a big smile on my face, and I knew it was time to start planning my senior project, an expedition to the beautiful canyons of Utah. I had a few initial questions as I began my planning. I knew I wanted to go somewhere warm, but had no idea exactly where. And I was unsure of the best group size. But most importantly, I wasn't sure when I would go. Having school every day proved to be very challenging to plan around, and I had no interest in backpacking through the snow blizzards and pouring rain of winter. So the most viable option seemed to be going over spring break and figuring out which places are hikeable at this time of year. Most high-altitude areas are below freezing and covered in snow right now, so backpacking in nearby mountain ranges was pretty much out of the question. So I researched different areas and talked about it extensively with my parents, and I kept coming back to Utah as the best place. For some context, here's a map of the United States, and Utah is the bluish rectangular shape that I colored in. The Colorado River is the squiggly turquoise line, and then the red circle is generally the area where we will be backpacking. Once I decided on Utah, the next step was to choose a route. I spent a long time going over the immense collection of maps that my parents have, but as I quickly discovered, it's very difficult to get an idea for a place from squiggly lines on paper. I did some Google searching, but that didn't turn out to be too helpful either. Talking with my parents in the end proved to be the most helpful because they have gone on so many trips in that area. Together we looked at old slides and discussed the pros and cons of different routes. Here's me looking at some of the maps. Eventually, I decided on a route through Lean-To Canyon, Dark Canyon, and Young's Canyon with some additional day trips up side canyons. I easily convinced my family to join me on this trip, so there will be 4 of us in total plus my dog. The route I chose has a good combination of slick rock and sand trails and is located near the Colorado River above Lake Powell, which is where we began our Grand Canyon trip, our rafting trip, a few years prior. I wanted to spend as much time out in the canyons as possible while not having to carry an insanely heavy pack, so 7 days seemed like a good amount of time. Piecing together 4 maps to get a better picture of Dark Canyon, my dad and I worked on mapping out a good route. Because Dark Canyon Wilderness Area is on Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service land, we did not have to get a permit, and we could take our dog, which made things a lot easier. We will take 2 days to road trip down to the Dark Canyon area, and once we have backpacked for 7 days, we will hopefully take a longer route home to visit Mesa Verde, as well as some fossils, glyphs, and other culturally significant sites in the Four Corners area. Originally inhabited by the Pueblo people, also known as the Anasazi, this section of the Colorado Plateau has ruins and glyphs that are over 1,000 years old, before the tribes migrated south due to drought and population increase. As part of the landscape, this contributes to the natural beauty and sacredness of this area that I have always been drawn to. With the goal of making our packs as light as possible, food and gear preparation were very important and needed to be precise, minimizing extras. Because my family spends time outdoors, we already had most of the gear we needed, aside from my brother who grows constantly and needed a new backpack. We took one of those classic family trips to REI, resulting in a lightweight bowl for my dog and some other miscellaneous items, most of which we didn't need. Well, actually, yeah, most of which we did need, but some of which we really didn't. Making sure that our stove and water filtration system worked was very important to do, as nobody wants to be stuck in the desert without the ability to cook or drink water. Here you can see on the left is our little stove. It's called the Whisper Light, and it's very small. I needed to calculate out the amount of fuel we would need to bring based on the number of meals and number of people. This probably took me a bit longer than it should have because I am pretty bad at math, but I figured it out eventually. And here's some of our other gear. Food planning for this trip proved to be a bit more challenging than past trips because it will be 7 days long, and we will not have the luxury of a raft to float it all down on. We will be carrying it on our backs, and I do not want to have any unnecessary weight. I needed to be selective in choosing meals so that we could eat the heavier and more fresh food first and save the lightest dehydrated food for the end. While I am not the biggest fan of dehydrated food, as some of you may know, it is very light, space efficient, and sometimes necessary. It is also important to be precise in the quantity of food so that you are only bringing as much as you need and no more. I planned out meals by the day and then figured out exact quantities, which I added to a massive grocery list. We also needed food for the drive down there, which was less important since we would have the car, but still needed to be considered in the food planning process and shopping list. Here are some pictures from a combination of our backpacking and car food. It's not entirely sorted out yet. Everyone will be carrying their fair share of weight, including my dog, who has his own backpack and is ready to go, as you can see here. He really doesn't like the backpack too much, but he walks twice as fast as all of us, and he eats food too, so it's only fair that he carries at least a tiny bit. At this point, you may have realized that I have not actually gone on my trip, as I don't have any pictures from this trip yet. I will be leaving on Saturday as soon as spring break starts, and am so excited to road trip, explore, route find, and fossil hunt, and sleep under the stars with my family. And of course, I look forward to the desert sunsets and sunrises. While I have spent hours planning out the different parts of this expedition, there is no way to know for sure how it will go because every adventure is unique and some unexpected change or challenge always shows up. I have spent a fair bit of time in the desert, whether river rafting, day hiking, or road tripping, but I have never backpacked here, which makes this more of an adventure because while in many ways it will be familiar, it will also be very new. Trips like these are so rewarding, in part because they are so difficult. Not only physically challenging, but also mentally taxing in terms of organization and preparation. Going into this project, I knew that backpacking at this time of year would be challenging, but I was determined to make it work. It has given me so much to look forward to, something to get me through the last few weeks of school before break. It will be really good for me to get out of the city and allow the desert to fill my heart and mind with beauty. Between the curving canyon walls made of rocks that are thousands of years old, I have always felt small. But there's something comforting to me about this feeling, and it fills me with a great sense of awe and appreciation for the wilderness around me. So while I feel so small, I also feel like part of something so much greater than myself. I would like to thank my parents and my brother for their constant love, support, and patience. My mom and Miss DeNono for helping me write my speech, and my dad for keeping me on track and spending hours of his time to help me make this happen. Thank you to all my friends and family for going along with my crazy schemes to get out of the city. You are what makes them special and memorable. Lastly, to my parents and Miss Bussey, thank you for inspiring me with your wild stories and unforgettable adventures. You have always encouraged me to follow my heart, and for that, I am truly grateful. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll take any questions you have. Yeah, Alma? Yeah, so the question is, how many miles do I plan to walk each day? So my family has an interesting way of doing trips. We basically plan the general route and then decide as we go along how much we feel like walking. And since there will be a lot of route finding involved with this, we're not actually following a specific trail. So depending on the day, there will be probably steeper canyons we need to deal with, or we'll have to backtrack. So it really depends. I think in total the trip will be above 40 miles, but I'm not sure how many we will do each day. Yeah, Gavin?
What part of the trip are you most excited for?
Gosh. I actually really love nighttime because you can see all the stars. When you're out in the desert, there's really no light pollution at all. And if you wake up in multiple parts of the night, you can see how it's changed, which is one of my favorite things to do, even though you don't get that much sleep as a result, but it's totally worth it. Yeah? Yeah.
Are you afraid or concerned about flash floods at all in these canyons?
So the question was, am I concerned about flash floods? I mean, honestly, not really. I think I've definitely had that concern on past trips that I've been on, where it seemed like more of an issue for the area. It seems to be pretty clear, and I didn't find anything in that when researching this general area, so I'm not too worried about it. Plus, there's not very much snow melt from that specific spot, so usually flash floods will happen a lot when there's a lot of water buildup, and if there's not too much snow to start with, then there won't be too much water, so I'm not too concerned. Oh, yeah?
My last question. Since you're gonna be there at the time when some of the spring flowers, the other flowers are starting to bloom, are you putting a guidebook in your pack at all, or are you
The question was, am I putting a guidebook in my pack to look at the flowers? Personally, I am very excited about the flowers. I love flowers. But I don't really want to carry a guidebook, so I think I'll just look at them and appreciate them, and maybe I'll take a picture with my camera so that when I come home I can look them up if I'm really curious. Yeah, Miss Stevens?
What food item have you packed that you were most excited?
That's actually a great question. What food item am I most excited about? Well, I got some gummy bears, but I'm gonna have to go with these hash browns they're dehydrated, but it's one of those rare Costco finds that is like, it's always at Costco, and it's just the best. They're salty and they're crispy and they're just so nice when you're backpacking. Yeah, Miss Palladino?
What was your favorite part of the trip planning, and what was your least favorite part?
What was my favorite part of planning and what was my least favorite part? I think honestly probably both of those fit under the same category of choosing a route, because I went into it really ambitious. I was totally excited to find out a place to go, and I got really into the research. I was looking up all these pictures and I had a really fun time, but I was also totally overwhelmed and could not choose where to go, especially because my parents have so many maps. So I was like looking through all these paper maps, trying to figure out where things were. So it was both very challenging and very exciting. Yeah? I took it at this place that's in Wallingford. Gosh, what was it called? I think it's just called CPR Seattle. Yeah. Yeah?
Are there poisonous snakes or bugs where you're going, and are you scared of them?
Are there poisonous snakes or bugs where I'm going, and am I scared of them? I've spent a lot of time doing trips in places where there's rattlesnakes, so I'm pretty used to them and I'm good at avoiding them. I'm not really a fan of bugs, but usually they stay away. But honestly, I'm most concerned about my dog because he's pretty curious and he doesn't really know how to deal with snakes. So we'll have to keep our eyes out. Yeah, Ariel? That's a great question. Do I have a dream backpacking destination? I would love to go backpack in New Zealand sometime. I was actually hoping to do that, but COVID has sort of continuously gotten in the way. And then when I looked at airplane ticket prices this time of year to go to New Zealand, there was no way it was going to happen. Yeah, Mr. Schweiker? Yeah, what am I going to do next year? So I'm taking a gap year next year, and for the first half of the year, I'm doing a backpacking trip semester with the High Mountain Institute, where I will go backpack pretty much for like half the year in Utah, Colorado, and then South America. Yeah. Yeah?
Are you going to bring or be willing to carry anything for doing art while you're on the trip?
Will I be bringing anything to do art on the trip? This is a question of great controversy among trip people because I know some people who like take their little mini watercolor sets. I don't think that I will. Maybe I'll bring a small notebook to draw, but usually what I do is that I take a lot of pictures and then I come home and draw and paint from my pictures. All right. Well, that seems to be it. But I would like to thank you all for coming today and watching my classmates and I present. It means a lot to all of us. And if you are able, please come tomorrow for our final day of presentations.
Of grade 8's project presentations. And welcome for those of you watching at home. Last evening we had 10, count them, 10 presentations in a very efficient 2 slightly plus hours. So you guys were in a hurry last night, but you got a good job done very efficiently, and we were all very proud of you. This evening, 9 more presenters, including one not quite the way it was intended. One of our comrades can't leave home and has to present from afar. And there's a complication because we're not using Zoom in this, believe it or not. There are other ways of streaming, and we chose to use another one because it's a little easier to use. So because of that, we lack that back and forth possibility. Sydney will be presenting through a video that she recorded earlier today, and it's essentially her PowerPoint presentation with her voiceover, because she put so much effort into showing the progress of her project over that time in her PowerPoint presentation, that was the choice she made, as opposed to being filmed talking to us and not having anything to show. So that's why it is the way it is. That's why you're going to hear her voice and see her PowerPoint presentation. But she's here in spirit, and we have a cheer for her right there, right near Ia. So the projects are one of the very special moments of the 8th grade year. They have been working on these for many months, choosing a project through late summer, early fall, and then finding an area of independent study that would inspire them, have them go deeper into an area that intrigued them. And you'll see there's a great variety in what has happened, and I think you'll be very impressed with what they accomplished. Again, as I did last night, I want to thank the parents and the mentors who were my boots on the ground through this process and helped me to keep them moving in the right direction, because there's only so much I could do from the classroom. James Spies helped me to get the class ready for these live presentations, and Jim Krantz has been invaluable in doing that before this evening and volunteering to do technical support this evening. So thank you, Jim. Without further ado, Cash.
Hello, my name is Cash Allen. I chose photography for my 8th grade report. I chose photography because of all the things it's used in. Movies, shows, documentaries, on advertisements, in school reports. Something that's used in so many different things is something that I think is worth learning. My mentor is a man named Rick Carroll. This is him on my board, and he's sitting right there. He is a professional photographer and my mom's good friend, and I think I can say my good friend now. He started with portrait photography and did that for many years at a booth at the Fremont Sunday Market. Now he works more with a picture called a still life. A still life is a photo that is taken of a natural or man-made object and is it's really a celebration of the real depth of the object or the real feeling that the object provokes. My mentor has taught me so much, and I wouldn't have been able to do this project without him. Thank you. First, my mentor started teaching me the basic functions of a camera: f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. F-stops are adjusted by pressing a button on the front of the camera and scrolling a dial on the top. F-stops control how open or how closed the lens is, and this controls how much light can get in, and yeah, the bigger the f-stop, my camera goes from f4 to f36. On f4, the lens of the camera will be as open as it can go, and on f36, the lens will be as closed as it can go. Next function we talked about is shutter speed. Shutter speed is controlled by just the dial on the top, and shutter speed controls how long the lens is open, from when you press the button on the top to take a picture to when it closes to the photo being taken. Shutter speed also affects how much light. The longer the shutter speed, the more time light has to get into the camera, and vice versa. Shutter speed can also create for some cool effects, like having a longer shutter speed and taking a picture of a moving object like a car, and in one photo you can see the full range that the car drove, and it's really cool. I hope to take photos like that. I didn't get to, but I'd like to. Also, using a shorter shutter speed, like 1/80th of a second or 1/100th of a second, you can stop things in motion. So, like when you're trying to take a picture of a sport, you would want to use a fast shutter speed like 1/80th or 1/100th of a second to stop whatever it is, a frisbee, a baseball, a basketball, whatever it is, as it is. The last basic function of a camera we talked about is ISO. ISO was the most confusing of the three, and even my mentor struggled a little bit to explain it to me. I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I can. ISO is essentially how sensitive the camera is to light. My camera goes from ISO 100 to ISO 1600. On ISO 100, the camera will be, or the picture will come out as sharp as it can be, but the sensors in the camera will be the least sensitive to light. On ISO 1600, the picture can come out a little bit fuzzy or noisy is the technical term, and that means a little grainy or fuzzy around the edges. But on ISO 1600, the sensors in the camera will be the most sensitive to light. You may ask why you would want to use a higher ISO if it's going to make the picture blurry or fuzzy. And to that answer, you will only want to use it as a last resort, if you really have to. If you've already adjusted your f-stops and shutter speed and your lens is as big as it can go and you still want to handhold the camera, you can change the ISO. That's the basic functions of a camera. Now I will talk about my mentor meetings. In my mentor meetings, I would either meet in a Zoom session or in person at my house. In the Zoom sessions, we would talk about photos I had previously taken. We would learn from them, talk about what's good, what's bad, and sometimes we would even do a little editing of the photos, cropping, maybe adjusting some colors. In the in-person ones, we would go around my house looking for good photos to take and also learning. Sometimes we would drive somewhere. One mentor meeting I remember pretty vividly. It was pretty early on in my report. It was one of the first times we were going to actually drive somewhere. My mentor showed up at my house very early in the morning. And we started. We drove into Ballard. That day was a lot of light. We tried to use light in a lot of different ways. We talked about shadow, flow, how to make a picture interesting. While we were in Ballard, I took one cool photo that I really like. It's this one. Kind of funny. It's we found this painting of an elephant using some like a drain pipe, and I think it's a great example of using shadow. There's lots of shadow that makes the picture interesting. The cars were stopped in this, but it looks like they could be moving. After walking around for a little bit, we turned a corner, and there was a man, an older-looking man, and he approached me and my mentor and said, asked my mentor, "Are you from National Geographic?" And my mentor said, no, but he is. And this was kind of flattering because obviously I'm not a National Geographic level photographer, but having my mentor say that felt really good. After that encounter, we hopped in my mentor's little Miata and drove to Golden Gardens. While at Golden Gardens, we continued using light and shadow and also talked about a very important aspect of a picture. Not putting your subject in the center of the picture. Not putting the subject in the center of the picture really creates for a more interesting photo. As you can see, most of my photos do not have a subject in the center. When it's in the center, it is boring, I think, and yeah, that's something that you should think about. That day was a very good learning process, and yeah, that day felt really good. Now I'm going to briefly talk about what goes into taking a photo. First, you have to look at your subject. Is there something that will make it different than something you'd see as you walk by? Is there enough shadow, flow, color, vibrance? Once you have assessed that, you can look into the photo, look into the camera. When you look into the camera, it gives you a frame, and in that frame is what's going to be in your photo. A concept that I struggled with a lot and that I would hope to work on in the future is not having things in the picture that I don't need. Having a bright light in the outer edges of your photo can really distract you from the main subject. And yeah. Once you have made sure everything is right in your frame, you can adjust the functions I'd previously talked about, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, to get the right color and contrast that you want. Once you've done that, you press the button on the top and it takes the photo. Once you've done that, it appears on this tiny little screen, and it is sometimes hard to see, tell if it's good. So I would recommend taking multiple photos on multiple different settings to ensure you're not wasting your time taking a photo. This project has really taught me a lot, and I think it's a great segue into high school and my very different life that's coming up. I've really learned a lot, and I'm very happy I did it. I'd like to thank my mentor, Rick, my teacher, Mr. Rule, my parents, my teacher, oh, I already said that, whatever, my classmates, and my grandpa who managed to make it today. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. That's a good question. I think that maybe possibly 33, 1/3 of it would be good. Definitely that would probably be a lot, but like 33 or less. Like 1/3 of your photos, my photos, that's kind of, what came out good. Yeah? This is a Canon 58 millimeter. Yeah, this is the camera I took all my photos with. Thank you. Sequoia will be next.
My name's Sequoia, and for my 8th grade project, I decided to make a board game. I've always liked playing board games. It's always fun for me to pick up a new board game and find new strategies for it, and it's fun for me to play board games. And when you make a board game, you can implement any part of any game that you want, and you can really make it your own board game. And if there's parts of games that you like, you can do that. And that's what I really liked about making a game. First thing I had to decide is basically what the main engine, what the basic mechanics of how your game's gonna run. For example, you could do a game like Risk, where you control different areas. You could do a game like Monopoly, where you go around the board and you buy, sell, and trade things. You could also do a game where you go from one part of the board to the other, like start to finish. Or what I originally chose to do, this is not what my final product turned out being, but is where it's like an adventure game. Basically, there's lots of paths. You can kind of go anywhere. And you just go around and do lots of objectives. I also wanted to incorporate dice rolling, and not just dice rolling where you just roll a die and it's just luck based on what you get. But like one game that inspired me is Dragonwood, where you roll dice to get cards, and you have certain numbers of dice that you can use. And I've always liked the probability of rolling different dice, and it's always been fun for me to figure out strategies to do with that. But I also wanted it to take it a step further, so you can use different dice. So for my game, I used 4, 6, 10, and 20-sided die. and I hadn't really ever seen that in very many games, so I thought that'd be a cool thing to add in my game. My mentor is Evan Schultz. He has designed and published games in the past, and he still is. It took a while to find a mentor because I didn't just have someone, like some friend or something that I knew. So I had to call a lot of like game stores to find him. But I found him. He was a really good mentor. I think we had around like 5 meetings. When I would meet with him, I would tell him the current rules of my game, and then we would discuss things that went well in the game and things that didn't. When we first met, we play tested the game. I gave him the current rules. Basically, it was each die is correlated with a certain element. So like because I got rid of the adventure style game where you go around, it just had way too many rules. And the worst thing in a game, especially when you're first making a game, is to have a bunch of rules in the game to the point where you don't even understand your own game. And that really just isn't good. So I changed that to a board where it's just a circle, but I've seen that in a lot of games, so I changed that. And I did this spiral board where it's like a serpent, and you go around and you spiral to the inside. So when I first play tested with him, the basic rules were each die is correlated to an element. So 20-sided die, being that it's the biggest, would be like, for example, these are the 4 elements I used. So for example, the 20-sided die would be earth, and the 4-sided die would be fire. And because the 20-sided die is earth, there'd probably only be like 4 earth cards in the deck. And because 4-sided die is low, there'd be a lot of fire cards, like 20. But this had a lot of luck in the game, and my mentor he said it needed more player choice when he first play tested it. He also probably said that because I beat him really bad, and so did my dad, and he didn't really like that. But it did need more player choice, and I wanted my game to have a lot of strategy in it. So I changed that so that now there's an even amount of elements in the deck, and each die costs a certain number of elements. So the 4-sided die costs 2 of the same element, 6-sided die costs 3 of the same element, 10-sided die costs 4 of the same element, and 20-sided die costs 5 of the same element. And basically what you do is you get cards, then you get those dice, and then you roll dice to kill monsters. Monsters have a certain amount of like health points from up to 2 to like 9. And when you roll to kill the monster, and if you kill it, you keep it, and then you get the end of the game, and then whoever has the most points wins. My game takes about 20 minutes. It's a 2 to 4 player game, so it'll be less than 20 minutes with 2 players, but with 4 players, it could take up to like 45 minutes. Some history about board games is people thought that board games were originally played to interpret the wishes of the gods. So like, especially with like pharaohs in Egypt, people thought that they would, like a lot of the games back then were based on luck, and people thought that they would basically, if you did really good in the game, they would think that the gods are on their side, and they would have like a priest or something interpret that. And there was also a game where they would throw sticks with one side of the stick had paint on it, and whoever did better with that. And it was a big deal if the gods were on your side. And originally it was like a prestigious thing to play board games, and it was only amongst royalty. But then more common people started playing, and now kids are the main audience that play board games. 3 really ancient board games that we still play today are backgammon, chess, and checkers. Backgammon being the oldest of those. It dates back to 4,000 years ago, and it was mainly played in the Middle East and is still pretty popular there today. A lot of the strategies of old board games like Battleship, Parcheesi, chess, checkers, a lot of those games were based off of war games. I mean, not the exact games, but that's where they originated, because there's a lot of war and a lot of strategy in war, and a lot of board games originated from that. Title of my board game, Smash, as you can see. I looked for another, took me a while, but I found another game that does have that name. So if I do want to get my game published, which I will try to, I'm going to have to change the name, but this is for an 8th grade project, so it's fine if I have that name for now, but if I want to publish it, I will have to change my name. I couldn't publish it in this project because it's a really long process. Lots of companies have to look at your game. It's just a really long process that you can't really do in an 8th grade project. The main thing I learned from this project is just keep trying new things. Don't get stuck. The words my mentor used were fail fast, which basically means you're going to mess up a lot, you're going to fail a lot, but just keep trying new things and just find new ways. That's what my mentor really helped me with, is finding out what's wrong with the game at that certain time and helping me just figure out what it is, because there's always going to be something wrong with it when you're playtesting it that's not making it fun. And it's really just process of elimination to find the right formula for your game to be fun. And yeah, just don't get stuck. I think that goes for a lot of things in life. And now if Canon could come up, I'm going to do a quick demo of the game. Okay, so there's 3 decks. There is the monster deck, which has monster decks blue. It has monsters. And there's the green deck, which is the elements. It just has those 4 elements. And the special deck has lots of random special cards. So each player starts the game with 7 cards. So I'll just do it face up so you can see. So this is my hand. I have 3 fire, 2 water, and air and earth. So 3 fire could get me a 6-sided die, and 2 water could get me a 4-sided die. So to move on the board, you roll a 6-sided die. And then, so I get a 2. So obviously I can't move the piece because it's sideways, but I would land on a special card. And this one says pick an opponent and swap spaces with them. And you could keep this special card. And then at any point in the game, you could swap spaces with them if you want to. And then roll cannons die. You got 3, that's a monster. So if he wants, he can fight the monster. He has a fire, 2 earth, 2 water, and 2 air. So I'm deciding for you, you're gonna fight the monster. The monster is a 5, so he needs to roll a 5 or better. So if he plays, he's gonna play 2 water and 2 air, so that means he gets 2 4-sided die, triangle dice. So if he gets a 4, he gets to kill a monster. A 5, yeah, he did exactly roll a 5, so he gets to keep the monster, and then he discards all the cards that he used. And then the draw space, if you land on it, you get 2 cards. And then if you land on the fight space, you go to your opponent. On the count of 3, you both reveal your cards. Kind of fun, you get to fight them, and then the loser loses their cards. And then just play continues around the board until you get to the center. And then the person with the most cards at the end gets that. And I'd just like to say thank you to my parents, my mentor, my classmates, my teacher. And this is a really fun project, and I'm really happy I created a board game that's fun to play. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, you roll the 6-sided die each turn. Yeah. Yes, I will. But because it's for publishing your game, there's a lot of just waiting and doing nothing and waiting for people to get back to you. So that's why I didn't do it during this project. Yeah. Okay. Micah. You just keep them in front of you, and then at the end of the game, you add up all the points from them. Anything else? Yeah? 2 to 4. Okay, thank you. Next up is Ian.
Hello, my name's Ian Payton, and for my project, I chose video editing. I chose video editing because I had wanted to learn how to do it for a few years now, and I just never got around to do it, so I saw this as a perfect opportunity to learn how to do it. My project was originally video editing and videography, and so I got my mentor, Sue Cochran, who owns a small company called Von Piglet Productions, and they make short films and movies. For one of my mentor meetings, I was actually taken on set for a Microsoft training video, and I was introduced to the entirety of the makeup and costume crew. I was brought to the editors and had a long conversation with them about what they're doing and their process. And I was even brought behind set and showed all the equipment and people running it. And I was actually introduced to the Microsoft employees who paid for the video. And so shortly after, my mentor sadly had a family emergency and would no longer be able to mentor me. And so I reached out to 2 other people, but none of them got back to me. So I ended up with my dad as my mentor, who luckily had done video editing and graphic design a few years back. And he introduced me to the resource that I'd be using, Adobe Premiere Pro, which is pretty much a professional level editing software that's actually pretty simple to learn the basics of, which I like, and I'll get more on that in just a second. So for my process, I was having a hard time finding videos to work with, so I ended up using what I had on hand and what was easier for me to get, gaming clips. And I used those to practice easy effects like video effects and audio effects, and then I moved on to video and audio transitions and presets, which was actually really easy. There wasn't much work needed to be done there. And the reason why it was so easy is because in Adobe, they have a whole effects menu that you can enter, and they have, for the presets, hundreds, if not thousands, of presets you can use for anything you want. And so that was made pretty easy for me. And in Adobe, you will have on the bottom right corner of your screen a timeline where you can view all of your videos, effects, and audio clips. And there you can shorten or lengthen them, and you can even adjust the audio. Like you can cut it off completely, you can delete it or make it into a subclip. And in the upper left-hand corner, you will see the either audio mixer where you can set the different levels of audio. So if you want something to be louder than something else, you can change it there. Or if you have a effect selected, it will show the effect editing menu where you can pretty much set the effect to start here and end there. And you can even edit how much it affects your video or audio. And what I like about Adobe, which to me makes it different than most other platforms, you can even edit the effect so that you can pretty much change it to do whatever you want. And so for my first product, it was going to be a short video on gaming clips, but you know, Waldorf school, can't present that. And so I kind of last minute had to work on a video, which will be presented in just a few minutes. And for that, I had like a weekend to do it, so it's not very long, and it doesn't show everything that I learned, but it's, yeah. can we? Should I start it, or can you?
Yeah, get a little higher.
So that was my video. Please do ignore the slight misspell of touch. I swear that wasn't me. That was my keyboard. But as you can tell, I obviously didn't have enough time to learn much about videography before I made that. And so, yeah, that's it. Any questions? Oh. Yeah, so for this first part, you can see I am in a platform called Discord. It's pretty much just for messaging, and I got my friend to send me a message saying, "Go touch grass," which is kind of a more Gen Z insult. It's kind of telling, it kind of means like, oh, you stay inside too much, go touch grass, don't interact with people. And so I used a recording software, OBS, to record this, and then I got my sister to do the recording on her iPhone. And so for the part of me getting up and going outside, the blinding light wasn't actually an effect I used. It was my sister sliding up the brightness on her iPhone while recording, which actually got the effect I wanted. And then once I got out to the park, which is where I filmed the touching grass, I used a song, Coconut Mall, which is from a game, Mario Kart, and I just dropped that directly under in Adobe, and the song itself is like longer than this video, so what I had to do was cut it down to end where I wanted, and then I used a volume effect to make it so that it slowly will fade by the end, and yeah, that's pretty much what I did. Any more questions? Yes, you. I want to lean more towards the editing, and yeah. Any other questions? Yes? No, I didn't get into the history. But if you want, I have a fun fact here for everyone. The very early form of video editing, they would take and lay out the film, and they would cut it to where they wanted certain sections, and they would put it together with this iron filings suspended in a carbon tetrahydride, which was very toxic, and that pretty much allowed you to be able to see the tracks visible under a microscope. Yes? I was actually, I was in a call with him, and I was eating some cake, and he messaged me saying he wanted some of it. Next up will be the video of Sydney.
My name is Sydney Olivier, and for my 8th grade project, I chose fashion design. I chose fashion design because when I was a kid, I loved fashion, and I enjoyed putting outfits together that sometimes didn't match that well, but I always enjoyed, and I eventually was starting to be called a fashionista. And around 3rd grade, I learned how to use a sewing machine, and I fell in love with sewing and creating little things that we got to make in class. And in 5th grade, I started drawing dresses. And this gave me the opportunity to put ideas in my head on paper, and I really enjoyed drawing all these dresses, and I still do sometimes, and I have a whole book of dresses. And this project really gave me the opportunity to put all 3 of the things that I love together. My love for fashion, my love for sewing, and my love for drawing dresses or any type of clothing. And that is exactly what I did. I created 3 dresses that I drew and I patterned and I made all by myself. This is my mentor, Tiffany DeFranco. Some of you may know her as Miss DeFranco. She is the handwork teacher at our school, and in college she majored in costume design, which made her a very natural choice to pick for my mentor. She helped me learn many things and taught me so much, and I couldn't have done any of it without her, so I wanted to give big thanks to you, Miss DeFranco. Thank you so much. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the process of making a dress and go into deep detail about my dresses and some of the challenges I faced. And towards the end, I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the tools I used. So when you think of making a dress, you first have to, like I said, think of it. You have to draw your idea down on paper with different sections and different angles. And once you have all that drawn down, you have to measure your model, whether that be you or someone else, and then go get your fabric, which is exactly what I did for all 3 of my dresses. The first dress I made was for Addie H. This dress was practically my guinea pig dress because it was the first piece of clothing that I've ever made. And for the first piece of clothing, I think I did pretty good. And this dress really gave me a lot of pointers on things to do in the future, like making sure I cut the right piece, because a few times I cut the skirt, one of the skirt pieces, the same way, like 4 times, and we were almost out of fabric, and finally the very last time I got it right, and then we really made sure from there that whenever I cut a piece of fabric, I had it at the right side or the right piece. This dress was probably the simpler one out of all of them, but it taught me a lot, and this dress was actually the only dress I used a pattern for that wasn't mine. For the skirt, I used a pattern we bought at the store, but I ended up patterning the top myself because I didn't like the way they did it. So once I had everything patterned and cut out, I sewed it all together, and we had Addie H try it on, and we did some adjustments to the top, and then we added a zipper, and we hemmed the bottom, and then I was done with this dress. This dress took me the shortest amount of time out of my 2 other dresses, but I really love this dress, and I will always remember it as my first dress. This is Amina's dress. This is the second dress I made, and I actually started making this during the time I was making my first dress. This dress is made out of a stretchy material called spandex. It's very, very stretchy, as most people know, and I ended up having to use a different type of sewing machine. The sewing machine I used is called a serger. It specializes in stretchy material, and it is also very good for hemming, or if you've seen any sweatshirt, the cuff is typically hemmed to give it a nice crisp edge. So the difference is a sewing machine, a normal one, just has 1 stitch and it just sews right through. And a serger has a little blade next to the needle, which cuts your fabric as you go. So like I said, it gives it a crisp cut. And a serger stitch is pretty much like 3 stitches, and it gives it a bit of give, so stretchy material doesn't break under pressure. So this dress, as you can see, has a bunch of stripes on it. It's covered in stripes. And this dress I patterned all by myself. So when I patterned it, I patterned all the stripes next to each other because I was drawing the dress. And before I cut the dress out, I added seam allowance on the sides of the dress, and then I cut it out. And if you don't know, seam allowance is there to give extra space so that when you sew, you don't take off too much fabric and end up having a piece smaller than you wanted. So if you look closely to the pictures, you can tell that on the sides there isn't seam allowance because all of the stripes were next to each other. So that was one of the challenges I faced because I had to eyeball seam allowance. I would pin it to my fabric, and I had to cut the fabric with my scissors and just eyeball the seam allowance, which was pretty stupid of me. I could have done something else to add seam allowance, but I didn't know at the time, and this ended up giving a lot of challenges in the future with sewing, and the fact that the material was stretchy made it harder to cut, which made it harder to give it a straight cut. So the seam allowance lines were a bit wonky, and during the sewing process I had to make some adjustments. So this dress has 4 sections: the top, the hip, the lower hip, and then the bottom. Once I had all of my stripes cut out, I sewed all these sections together. Once I had all of my sections sewn, I sewed my sections to each other, and I had the front piece and the back piece. Once I had my front and back pieces sewn together, I patterned the shoulder and cut it all out and sewed it together. Then we invited Amina to come to one of our mentor sessions so we could measure the shoulder piece on her and see if there were any adjustments we had to make to the dress to fit her better. We eventually got the shoulder piece sewn on and made minor adjustments to the dress, and it fit her really well. The last thing we did was hem the top and add a buttonhole and a button. This dress for me was the hardest one to make simply because of all the stripes and the fact that the material was a stretchy material. But this dress, I think it turned out gorgeous, and I'm really proud of how it looks. The last dress I made was for myself. This dress has a few different fabrics that work with it. First one is tulle, which gives it a little bit of a poof to the skirt. The second one is satin. It's a black satin, obviously. And the third is a flowery sequined fabric that, as you can see, is on the jacket and over top of the skirt. And there is a corset, but I did not make that one myself. For this dress, I made a jacket, and I'm glad I did because Mr. Franco taught me how to make a sleeve pattern, which in the future I can use to make so many things because sleeve patterns are used in a lot of things, in shirts, in jackets, in sweatshirts, and sometimes in even dresses. So it was a great thing for me to learn. And I learned about everything about a jacket and a shirt, and now I know how to make a shirt on my own. For my skirt, there are 4 layers, the bottom 2 being tulle to give it a poofy feel, and the third being a black satin, and the fourth and final one being a flowery sequined fabric that I talked about earlier. And once I had all my skirts sewn out together and everything was patterned and sewn together, I sew all 4 of my skirts together. So once I was done sewing my skirt, I started on my jacket. And the first time I sewed it the wrong way. If you look in the top corner, you can see that I sewed the 2 back pieces together and the 2 front pieces together, which may not look wrong to you, but it definitely looks wrong to me. So Mr. Franco told me what I did wrong, and I had to go home and seam it all. And then I finally sewed it the right way. Once I finished my jacket, it was time to sew the skirt onto my corset, which they didn't fit in the sewing machine, so I had to hand sew, and it took me about an hour and a half. But once I was done with that, the skirt looked really pretty on the corset, and I was really happy with how it looked. This dress, for me, was a lot of fun, and I'm glad that I got to work with a sleeve pattern, and I think it looks really, really pretty. I probably won't be wearing it much after this, but it does look really, really pretty. During this project, I used a bunch of helpful tools, and some of the ones I used were patterning paper, which is the first picture, which is basically just a long roll of paper that you do all your patterning on. And I used measuring tape, and I used scissors, and I used pins, a lot of them, and I used a seam ripper, which some of you may not know what it is, but a seam ripper is basically in the title. It helps you rip a seam if you sewed something wrong, like when I sewed my jacket wrong. I used my seam ripper for that. And the last thing is a yardstick, which also helps with patterning. If you have something like Amina's dress or my dress where it's long and you need to use a whole yardstick. Looking back on the dresses I made, I'm so glad I chose this to be my 8th grade project because I know my younger self and myself now are very proud that I made all these dresses, and I made my drawings, my 2D drawings, become 3D in real life, and people are actually wearing them. It's really exciting for me, and I love this project, and I would like to invite Addie and Amina on stage to show their dresses, and I really wish I could be there to show my dress too in person, but I'm really glad that Mr. Rule was able to help me figure out something to be able to still present to you guys. And have a good night. Thanks for coming to my presentation.
Hello. Yeah, is this on? What? 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 Help me out. All right, try it again.
Hello?
All right.
What? Help me out.
All right, so Sydney, you have to turn down your end because we're getting feedback. So Sydney, turn it down at your end. Okay?
Turn off the...
All right. Do you have any? So Sydney, you ready to answer any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? She's here, folks. Ask her a question.
How long did it take to make the first dress?
Did you hear that? Yeah.
Yes, I did. The first dress, well, it took me all of handwork, which we have handwork for the first section of the year, and it took me, I'd say that was like 2.5 months probably, and I did it all at school.
Cool. Another question?
How much fitting did you have to do once you had the models there? Was it a lot? Was it a little?
Did you hear it?
No.
How much fitting did you have to do once you had the models?
So for Addie, I only had to do a bit. I had to adjust the top because it was a bit too big, and the shoulders, the sleeves, I had to make a bit smaller. And on Amina's, I did a lot of adjusting during the sewing process because, as I was saying on my slideshow, when I eyeballed all the seam allowance, some of it was a bit wonky, so things didn't match up. So I had to make adjustments along the way. But on her, I had to just adjust the top because it was a bit too long, and the shoulder a bit. And for my dress, I didn't really have much changing to do because it was on me, so I was able to see through the whole process, so there wasn't much adjusting for mine.
Another question back there.
Does your experience make you appreciate the work that goes into clothes that you buy at the store?
Does your experience make you appreciate the experience of what you actually buy in a clothing store?
Yes. Most clothing in the store isn't handmade, but I do, whenever I see clothing now, I look at it as how do I make it instead of, ooh, I like that clothing. I've noticed that I look at it and I say, ooh, I want to make that, or that looks fun, and I try to understand how I could make that in the future.
Thank you, Sydney. And now, is it Ia? Can't see. Okay.
Hello, I'm Ia Shepherd, and I did my project on comic books. I had lots of ideas before this, like I dreamt of making a music video because I really like singing, but I decided to do a comic book because I really like to read comic books, and I like to draw, and I like to tell stories. And I vividly remember in 2nd grade, a lot of you might remember this. I had this comic called Super Cheese that a lot of people liked. And so I just remembered that, and I've done it before, so I'll do it again. Before I get into my stories, I'll give you a brief rundown of some history of comics. They were, at least in America, they were originally in the newspaper, when that was a thing. And it was kind of, they put it in there to make to see when you look at it, it's different from the words. And they realized that the funny pictures in the paper made the sales go up, so they kept putting them in there. And after a while, they got put into albums and sold as comic books. Now, I'm going to be talking about my experience with comic books, and everybody else's is different because everyone has their own style for both art and storytelling. So I'm just going to be talking what I did, and I probably want to give you a brief introduction on the stories that I did work on. I worked on 3 different stories because I'm impatient and I wanted to work on a lot of stuff at once. My first story I called Not So Happy Accidents, and those are these pages here. I think the hardest part with that story was, well, I worked on the written part a lot. I thought about it, and I was really thought out, and I was obsessed with my own story because I loved all the characters and I had spent so much time on it. But the pages, I wanted every single one to be perfect, and well, they weren't good enough for me, and so I really struggled with that because they were never up to my own standards. So I got stuck, and so I decided to work on a much less stressful story because the art isn't as perfect as I wanted it to be in the first one, I guess. I worked on it because the art was not up to the standard that I had myself up for the first one. And that my second story was Happy End of the World. And that's this one. And as you can probably see, it's a lot more sketchy than the first one. And it's just, it was like a chill out story to quiet down from the stress of writing the first one. And that one I didn't work on for long. Like I said, I was like, whew, I can still write stories. I'm not an absolute failure. And then I moved on to my third story, which I called Hate or Be Hated. And I don't have a lot on that one, but that's this one. And now that I've introduced you to all my stories, I can talk a bit about the process. A big thing is character design, and I think, well, my character design is a lot more than just how the character looks. It also has to do a lot with the personality. In fact, that can be even more important than how the character looks because that's what drives the plot, therefore the story. And one thing that I really tried to focus on was the way that the characters interacted with each other, the way that they bounced off of each other. Like, you have a really hyper character, you want a more mellow character to balance it out so that you're not just getting screamed at when you're trying to read peacefully. And so I spent a long time like thinking about all the characters individually, and I really enjoy writing characters, so that wasn't too hard for me. And as for how they look, I kind of just put that up to how I like to draw, like what clothes I like to draw, and also tried to make it match their personality. For plot, I kind of just make it up in my head. I don't really have any set plan for it. It kind of just happens how it happens, I'd say. It kind of just flows onto the paper. I don't really know how to explain how I write a story. In conclusion, I feel like the biggest thing I struggled with this project was the fact that this is something that I usually do by myself. It's really private to me when I draw and when I write. It's something that I do for me and for the people that I'm close to. I very rarely share it with a lot of people. And so it was hard for me to share it with people. Another thing was that I put myself to a very high standard with my art. So it was hard to get my ideas onto paper because I didn't want to share it because I didn't think it was good enough. But I think I learned that after sharing it with some of my classmates to like run, or my teachers or my parents, is that they actually all really liked it, and they all liked it for different reasons. And so one thing I'll take away is that whatever story I write or whatever art I make, there's always going to be someone out there who's going to enjoy it a lot and is going to be as obsessed with it as I am. And that I don't really have to worry about people not liking it, because as long as there are people who do like it, that's all that really matters. And I'd like to thank my classmates who gave me a lot of inspiration for all of my stories, my parents and teachers who hounded me and on working on it, and I feel like a very important part or person to thank is me. Even though I feel like I didn't do a lot, I still did work, and so I think it's very important to thank myself. Any questions? Liz? By far my favorite character is, I'll be stepping away from them. Is him. And I like her style, and I like her hair, and I like her personality. She's really fun to draw and really fun to write. Miss Driscoll? I haven't written him in a while, and I think August is the only one with any living copies. Over there. What sort of style do you use for comics? I have a very cartoony style, not very realistic. For storytelling, I try to do very fast-paced, comedy-based. If you know me in real life, I'm a very, how should I say this, gory person? Yes. Yeah. So I like dark humor, fast-paced comedies, and I like to write that and integrate that into my own writing and art style. My mentor was a guy named Eric, and I talked to him plenty at first, but I kind of drifted off after a while and started doing my own thing. And he was concept artist and character designer.
Thank you, Gia. Who's next, Gia?
Isaac.
Hi. Oh, wait. Hi. My name's Isaac Figueroa. Wait 1 second. Is there a trash can? I have gum. No, I'm sorry. Alright. I'll take it off after. Alright, I'm sorry. My name's Isaac Figueroa. I chose for my project, I chose woodworking. I chose this project because I thought it'd be fun, and I have a saw at home, so I thought I would like to give it a try. And this wasn't actually my first idea. I was gonna do planetary research and like sciencey stuff, but I thought it'd be way too hard. My second project was gonna be computer related, but I didn't want to do that. So I came into woodworking class one day, and I decided I wanted to do it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, does it work now? Bottom arrow, right? I don't think it works. Yeah, for my 8th grade project, woodworking. In woodworking, I decided to make a chessboard. Yeah, next slide, please. For everything I did in my project, I used basswood because it's an easy, soft wood, easy to cut, easy to carve, and I really like the texture of it. Thank you. This is, no, it's okay. No, yeah, keep it there. This is the room I did all of my work in. On the top left corner, or no, on the left wall, there are most of the tools I had, but I used like 3 of them. On the very back wall, there's a bunch of tape. Didn't use that. I don't know why I mentioned that. But on the table, you can see the very back. There's some pieces. Those are my chess pieces. I'll show later. Right behind the laundry machine, you can see like a metal thing. Could you go to the next slide so I can show that? And that's what it is. That is my bandsaw. I cut all my pieces with it. I used it for my chessboard as well. And those knives in the center, I mostly used those for cleaning up the excess splinters of wood in my pieces, so you don't get splinters if you play. Next slide, please. That's my chessboard. I have it here as well. One second. So, for my chessboard, you can see all my pieces. They're pretty thick. I didn't really want them to get thick. Now that I made them, I wish I made them thinner, but that's okay. It looks a bit smudged because I kind of accidentally wiped them off a bit too early, so they're smudged off. But in between each individual square, each square is 1 inch by 1 inch. But in between, I made a trench, and in that trench, I wood burned the inside of it. And the wood burner, I think, will come up later. Next slide, please. That is my pawn. I'm gonna take one here. Okay, so I have one right here as well. It's 1.5 inches tall and 0.9 inches wide, so you can actually grab the side of it if you want to move it on the actual chessboard. Alright, for the trend, for all my tools, the tools I used for this was my bandsaw, my picking knife. It's not for picking, but I used it for that. Anyways, my bandsaw, my hacksaw, and my knife. Yeah, I measured using a ruler from top to bottom, a centimeter below the top of the piece. I put a dot. On the other side, I did the same thing, centimeter down, put a dot. And I did that on all sides, all 4 sides. Using my ruler, I went back and I lined up my lines with my dots, the line of my ruler with my dots, and I drew a line on all 4 sides again. Going back with my hacksaw, I don't know, I guess I just made a trench with it, and using my knife, I picked out the access pieces. That's that. Next slide, please. Next is my rooks, right here, little trench, 2 trenches. They're just under 2 inches tall, again, 0.9 inches wide, as of all my pieces. My tools I use for my rooks are the tools I used were the bandsaw, the hacksaw, a file, a little bit of a chisel, and my knife. I used my bandsaw to cut in 2 lines on each trench, and I went in with my hacksaw and I cut in a little bit deeper, going back with my bandsaw again because it was a little bit too slow. But then my first one kind of popped, don't know why. So I went my first one. Actually, my dad helped me with this one. I should mention that he helped me a lot. And as I continue, and I'm continuing this again, my hacksaw I cut in, and I used my file to shave it down, flatten it, and then I used my knife to take out the splinters again. Next slide, please. My knife. One second. Right there. So here's one of my knives. I accidentally colored 3 the same, so this is one that you can see a little bit dark paint. And for this piece, I cut 45 degrees off the top. Oh, actually, I'm going to say the tools first. Well, actually, it's just under 2 inches tall again. But the tools I used were the bandsaw, the hacksaw, and a picking knife again. Those are my 3 main ones, so you're most likely going to hear all 3 of those, all of them. But on the very back of the top of the piece, I cut down 45 degrees of the piece. I went down just above halfway up the piece to make the snout. About just under 2 centimeters below the snout, I went in with my bandsaw and I cut in halfway up the piece to make the mouth. I went back with my hacksaw and made it a little bit deeper. My picking knife obviously picked out the splinters again, and that's how I made my 4 knights. Next slide, please. Bishop, my bishop. Which bishop should I use? Where are my bishops? Oh, here's one. All right. Here's my bishop. It's by far the simplest piece. I wasn't very proud of how this one turned out. I wish I made them a bit taller, but they're really short. They're almost as tall as a pawn. I wish I made them taller, but I can't go back in time now. I wish I could. Really wish that. But I went from the very top back, down 3/4, down the front, and I cut 60 degrees off the top, and that's really all I did. I wish I did more, but I didn't know what to do. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. For my king and queen, I used my bandsaw, hacksaw, pick, and my knife. My queen looks a bit unprofessional right now because that's just after I cut in the line, so it looks pretty uneven, but there's still pencil lines on it, but that's okay for now. I used the same method I did with the pawns, and I cut in 2 lines, 2 trenches, and that's kind of all I did, because I didn't want to make it too similar to the king. And I was going to put 2 trenches into the king as well, using the same method, but I decided to just put a little bulb but for each of for 2 kings, I used the inside of the rooks. So 2 of the rooks can fit on top of the king nicely. Well, only some of them, but that's how I made my chess pieces. Next slide, please. This is my wood burner. And I used it for the trenches in my chessboard. And it makes it a bit darker, so it's not just shade making it darker. It is actually burned. It almost caught on fire once, which is very bad. Very, very bad. I don't think you want that. I don't think anybody wants that. It takes a while to heat up, but I don't have a lot to say about my wood burner since I only used it on my chessboard. And that's kind of all I use my wood burner for. I guess next slide, please. Oh, wow. I just explained that. But that's the end of my presentation. But I'd like to thank my dad, my classmates, and my teacher for helping me through my 8th grade project. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Have you played a game on it yet?
I have not yet. I plan to today.
I think I just love the substantialness of the pieces.
Thank you very much.
Board. I think they look powerful.
Thank you. You.
I really like the modern list of pieces. Did you design them all?
No, I modified them to one I found. I really liked the square look of them. I was gonna originally go for a circular chess piece, but just making a circular cylinder out of the square pieces I got, it took 2 weeks just to barely make one. So I decided not to do that. Any other ones? All right, trust. Oh, the night was my favorite part. This, it took me just under a day for how complicated it looks, but I really enjoyed making the knights. They're by far my favorite part of my chessboard. Is that it?
Thank you, Isaac.
Oh, there's one more. There's one sneaky one.
What was the hardest piece in your chessboard?
Oh, my hardest piece. Probably my rook. It took almost 2 weeks. But it was the hardest one because the filing took a long time. But the longest time to make my pieces was 3.5 weeks for my pawns because there's 16 of them, and I messed up on 4 of them because the trenches weren't even. Was that it? Oh, another one. They keep on coming. Oh wait, you put your hand down. Are you sure? Oh yeah.
So what did you enjoy the most in the process of doing this project?
I don't know. It was all the same. I least enjoyed making my PowerPoint. It was very boring. It's very, very boring. I hate using PowerPoint. I don't know why. I have something against it.
Thank you.
Is that it? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jacob Searcy, and for my 8th grade project, I decided to make a chess video game. So, next slide, please. This is my mentor, Jacob Searcy. He is my father. I chose him because in the past, when I had done programming projects, he had helped me a lot. So it was a great fit to have him since I had already done this sort of thing with him. Next slide, please. So this is one of the things that I worked in. It's called Unity. It's a game engine. And so the purpose of it is to hold everything that I want to show in my game. So on the left, you can see one of the tabs, the hierarchy. It holds a list of all the objects that are going to be put inside of your game. The next tab, the big one in the middle, is the scene view. This is where you can see everything in your game in a view that you can move around in and rotate in. The next one is the one on the right, the inspector. This is the view where if you click on something in the hierarchy, it shows a more detailed view of it with numbers for things like the position, the rotation, and the scale. You can also attach things like scripts or materials. Materials being something that you can use to change the color or texture of an object. Next slide, please. Next slide. Do this. So this is one of the large pieces of the programming language I used, C#. This is a variable. It's used to hold things. So the first piece of variable is the type. The type of this variable is a game object, which means it holds something that is going to be displayed inside of the scene. The next piece is the name, in this case being tile highlight prefab. This is just how you want to refer to the variable, so that way you can know what's inside of it. The last piece is what's in it, and in this case, it's just getting whatever I decide to put in it in Unity. The purpose of a variable is so that in case you want to have a number change and you want to have it set at the beginning, you have a variable so that way you can have it be changed throughout your program. Next slide, please. So this is another very big piece, a function. So functions, like variables, have a type. The type of this one is a game object because it would like to have it return something that is in the scene. And so what I mean by return is when you decide to use a function, you have to say its name, and then the reason why you would want to use one is because you're trying to have it do something that you don't want to keep having to type out. The next piece is the name, in this case being piece at grid. This is just how you refer to the function in your program. The last important piece is the parameters in the brackets. Each parameter is a variable with a type. In this case, it's a vector2int, which means that it's a two-dimensional plane with two numbers for the x and y values of the plane called grid point. You decide your parameters based on what you want to pull into the program. So in this case, this function is for detecting if there's a piece at a certain point on the grid and telling the program what piece there is there. So having a point on the grid pulled in is a very good parameter. Next slide, please. So when I load my game, the first thing that happens is it runs the game manager script. The game manager script starts off by creating a piece based on a variable for each unique piece and the board in each of the spots it's needed on the board. The next thing it does is it assigns each of those pieces to a list of either the current player or other player, which is used to determine whether a piece belongs to one or the other player. The next thing it does is during programs, it runs some functions that help determine if a piece is selected or if it's a certain player's. Next slide. This, after Game Manager has run, then the next script will be Tile Selector. And Tile Selector, the first thing that it does is it shoots a ray out from the camera towards the mouse to see what it hits. The only thing that it can hit right now is the board because it's the only thing that I have attached to a collider to. Then it creates a yellow square wherever the number it returns from where the ray hit. Then it checks to see if your mouse is down. Then if it is, it will check if there's a piece there. And if there is, then it will check if there is a piece, if that piece is a part of the current player's list of pieces or the other player's list of pieces. If it's part of the current player's list of pieces, then it will transfer it over to Move Selector. Next slide. Move Selector, first thing it does is it finds the selected piece's variable and checks a script attached to the piece. This script determines the rules for how the piece can move, and then it puts a blue square in each of the possible move locations. The next thing it does is it gets rid of any blue squares that are off the board or blocked by another piece by checking. Then it checks if those pieces are current players or other players. If they're current players, it just gets rid of the squares, and if they're other players, it will put a black box there. The next thing it does is it checks whether you're pressing your mouse down, and if you are clicking your mouse, then it will determine if that is a valid move. If it is, then it will clone whichever piece is selected, place that clone where you clicked your mouse, and delete the previous piece. Then, if you took any pieces, it will also delete those. Next slide, please. So, this is a video demo of my game. You can play it. This is just, it's running very fast, displaying the blue squares, and you might see soon the red squares. So there's the red squares that happen when you can take a piece. You can just pause it. I think it's shown its function. Are there any questions? Micah? That's just a piece. So I didn't make these chess pieces. I downloaded assets to decide what they looked like. So that was just part of the assets that I downloaded. I don't think I see anybody in the back. Oh, you? I have. This is actually me playing it, simulating a two-person game. I have. I played it with my mentor once. Okay. Oh, Cash?
How long have you been coding?
I have been programming since I was 10, so 4 years. At least. Truss? Then it stops all functions. It will turn off all of the scripts, and if you're in the Unity editor, then it will print a message in the console that says which player won. Where? I think it was probably getting started. I procrastinated quite a bit with it, so it became very stressful at the end, and that was probably the hardest part. Okay, I don't think I see anybody else. So next up is Damien.
Hello everyone, my name is Damian Larrett, and my project is how birds are in crisis. So at the beginning of this project, I had read an article about how birds were migrating through New York City, and over 300 dead birds were found under one building in one morning after crashing into skyscraper windows. This is not only happening in New York, this was happening all around the world, and maybe even in your own backyard. I also had read that in the past 50 years, the population of North American birds have dropped nearly 30%. And these two things inspired me to kind of learn more about why and how these things are happening. And so I wanted someone who can help me with this and who could guide me along. And so my mentor for this project was Woody Wheeler. Next slide. So this is us at Nisqually Wildlife Refuge. So my mentor is a very experienced birder. He is a master birder, which is one of the highest levels of knowledge for birding. He is also an author and he guides trips all around the world about birding. And I have talked a lot to him about how birds are in crisis, and he has suggested some species that have been heavily impacted by humans. So that was really helpful. And so what are the main reasons why birds are dying? So next slide, please. So this is the first one, so window collisions. So window collisions kill about 2 billion birds a year, and this is because windows are reflective, and so a bird might see the sky reflected or something else that they want, like vegetation or something in the window that they want, and so they crash into the window and sometimes die. But the number one reason why birds are dying is cats. Next slide. So even if well fed, cats can kill over 2 billion birds a year and contribute to at least 30 bird species extinctions. So, and this is because, cats are naturally born with the instinct to hunt, but this is actually mostly domestic cats. Another thing is habitat loss. Next slide. So habitat loss is affecting a lot of birds and a lot of other animals around the world. Some examples are this, of birds that nest near the drier western United States. They're being affected because of more wildfires. And then also birds that nest near the Arctic are being affected because their main food source, which is ice-loving or cold water-loving fish, still hard to tell that, because the ice caps are melting, and so the fish are moving farther out, and so the birds are forced to relocate to somewhere else, or they're gonna have to try a lot harder to get their food. Another thing is well, actually, habitat loss was on, but I was actually talking about climate change there, so all right. So for habitat loss, millions of acres of trees are cut and burned down each year for farmland and the expansion of cities. This actually happened in my neighborhood recently. So there was a part of a forest that was cut down for the expansion of 8 houses. And one of the trees that was cut down had an eagle nest in it. And that had it might have had a family of eagles in it. And so, if there was birds in it, then they would certainly die. So that was pretty sad. And also, all the other trees were being used for feeding and other things that really affected the population. So I wanted to focus on some more birds that have been heavily impacted by humans. Some of these were suggested by my mentor. The first one is the California condor. So this bird is very, very big. It has one of the biggest wingspans in the world. So each wing is like this long. This bird nearly became extinct in 1987, mostly because of habitat loss, hunting, and they were eating dead animals that have been killed by that have been killed by lead ammunition or pesticides. So this caused their population to drop down to just 27 worldwide. So that was it's a very low number. And so wildlife services were essentially forced to capture the remaining birds and put them into a captive breeding program. And so another population is about 500, which is much better than 27, but it's still not an ideal population. Another bird is a trumpeter swan. Next slide. So this bird also nearly became extinct in the early 1930s. So the population went down to just over 50. And this is mainly because of the use of their feathers. So their feathers were used for quills in the 1600s to the 1800s. The Declaration of Independence was most likely signed by a trumpeter swan feather. But now they made a very big comeback because we don't use quills anymore. And the population has reached over 60,000, which is very good. And I've seen them a lot around Puget Sound, but imagine that photo being the whole entire population of the trumpeter swan, so I think that's pretty sad. Another bird is the ivory-billed woodpecker. So this is one of the birds that was declared extinct during my project. And the reason why it was declared extinct is because of its habitat loss, and the last confirmed sighting of one of these birds was all the way back in 2004. So I'm going to talk about some benefits of the birds, because if we could help save them, then are there any benefits? So there actually are quite a few. So I'm going to go over a few of the big ones. So, so birds eat insects. So insects eat crops, and so a single bird can save up to 24 pounds of coffee beans per acre a year. So from pest damage, so that's very helpful. Also the pollinators, for example, like the hummingbirds, they help our forests regrow and our gardens grow, and they help us get our food. I actually think there's one bird that I also wanted to mention. It's called the Arctic tern, and this is a very impressive bird because it travels more than 12,000 miles for its annual migration. That's also called a South Pole, and it can fit in the palm of your hand. So that small a bird can fly that distance is just, I can't imagine that. So next slide, please. So here are some simple actions. So I just want to highlight a few of these that I thought were pretty important. So the first one is making your windows safer. So I actually myself have had birds crash into my windows before, and I wanted to do something about that. And so I put stickers on, and that didn't work whatsoever. I feel like there were more birds that were crashing into the windows. I don't know. And so I tried putting a rope that was on the top of the window hanging down. That seemed to help a lot. Another thing is, if you can, keeping cats indoors a little bit more often. Cats, you need to go outside a lot. But they kill more birds than any other non-native threat. I myself have a cat, but I haven't had trouble keeping it inside since it is 18 years old, and it has never moved in like the past 4 years. So also for this project, I have a bird feeder. Next slide. This is my bird feeder. This is a northern flicker on it right now. Or, well, that's from the time I took my photo. But so bird feeders are really good because in the winter, when birds are like struggling to get food, it's hard for them to find food. So a bird feeder can be like a real lifesaver to them. Also, if anyone here has a bird feeder, then you probably should clean out a lot more than you would think, because there are a lot of diseases going around that are pretty deadly to birds. So yeah. Also for this project, I've been doing some conservation. Next slide. So this is a pollinator garden. So this is where I'm planting flowers and trees and other plants to help the pollinators. And so I've also been doing bird census counts that is led by my mentor, Woody Wheeler. This is where a group of 30 or so people, we go out on the trail, Brookhaven Trail, and we try to count as many birds as possible. And we've been seeing a lot of increase in population, and we believe it's because of our habitat restoration. So for one of the mentor visits that I remember really clearly was when we went to Juanita Bay. Next slide. This is their double-crested cormorant, and as you can see, it has a piece of plastic around its neck. So I thought this was very sad to me, and this kind of showed me that where it lived was clearly polluted, and at the time I was taking this photo, the plastic was clearly interfering with its flight and its feeding. So it could very well be dead by now. Also for this project, I joined the Seattle Audubon Society Youth Birders Group. That's where a bunch of birders my own age, we meet up once a month on Zoom and in person, just to like talk about and look for birds. So on one of those trips, we went to Skagit Valley. This is pretty memorable to me because this is where thousands and thousands of birds migrate to. And so next slide. This is one of the things I saw there. I think this is pretty cool because bald eagles clashing talons. So this is where two eagles are high up in the sky and they're falling down at really quick speeds, and they're clashing talons. So this could either be signs of aggression or some sort of mating ritual. As you can see, they're holding talons. I don't know, but yeah. So also for this project, I have a birdhouse. I already made a birdhouse. Next slide. So this is this birdhouse is especially good for the black-capped chickadee, and this is a really common bird around my house. So that was pretty good. So I'll be hoping to have a bird visit it maybe soon. All right, after researching how birds are in crisis, I now understand a lot more about why and how birds are dying, but I also understand a lot more about how to help birds, like doing my conservation and my bird census counts. Next slide. I thought this was kind of a good example. This kind of showed me that there's a lot more birds than I thought there were out there. There were like 30 birds gathered around this tree, looking up at a redpoll, which is a kind of rare bird around Washington. I'm also getting a lot better at identifying bird species by sight and by ear, probably because I'm around so many people who are even my own age, who are better than me. There's one kid who's 12 years old and he's been birding for 7 years. No, I wouldn't have that much patience. I'll continue to learn with my mentor, Woody Wheeler. He is a very good mentor, and without him, like when I go birding without him, I barely see any species because I'm so inexperienced, but when I go with him, I see like 30 or something, and it's really enjoyable when I go with my mentor. So I will be hoping and crossing my fingers to see if a bird will visit will nest in my bird house sometime this spring. Thank you. Any questions? Oh yeah.
Also, like lit towers on top of tall buildings. Did you learn anything about that?
Yes.
Those are true.
I think that those were like the top 2 in like 2015 or something, but cats and windows have really, because there's more domestic cats and more windows that are now producing, or cats are not produced, but windows are produced, and then the cats are being adopted. So yeah.
Do you now have a favorite bird?
I don't really have a favorite bird. I do tend to like raptors. I feel like it's kind of boring just looking at the small birds around my area. Yeah. Judy?
So do bells on cat collars help?
It does, but I really don't like that because, that annoys the cats endlessly, and yeah, I mean, you could, but I think just keeping them indoors a little bit more often is more effective.
We have a cat who used to go outside. He had 4 legs. And I learned about we call it clown collar. Have you seen these? It's like literally a clown collar that slides over the cat's collar, and they are said to reduce bird death by 90%.
I have never heard of that.
Well, you should look it up.
I will.
Yeah. Not clown collar, but like something.
You can go anywhere in the world, go birding wherever you want to go.
Well, actually, this spring break, I'm going to Australia to see my cousins, and that is where I really want to go. I want to see like all the emus and the cockatoos, and yeah, I think that'll be really fun. I don't is, but you. Isaac.
How do I keep my cat inside? It won't stop meowing.
Well,
It'll meow at the door for 5 hours straight if it could.
well, I mean, like I said, I don't know, I have no experience with this because my cat hasn't moved in a long time.
Thank you, David.
August is next.
Hi. Oh yeah, mask. Hi, my name is August Lechner, and for my 8th grade project, I chose to learn the basics of a coding language and make a simple game out of that. So the reason I chose to do this was because I had always wanted to learn how to code, and it was a great way to learn how to code, plus having a good 8th grade project, and game development is a good job to have, so could be a good future job. Now I'm going to talk about my mentor meetings and process on learning how to code and making a game. So in October was when I decided to change from my original idea for what I wanted to make for a game. So I changed it. So originally I wanted to make like a full video game, like with graphics and stuff, but then when I figured out how much work it would actually be, I realized, oh, I don't have time to do this, because it would have been, my mentor said it would probably end up taking around like 2.5 to 3 hours every single day. And that, I was just like, oh, that's way too much for me to do every day. So I decided to just make a word game. So essentially a game without graphics. It just describes what everything looks like to you. In November, I essentially just started making learning the basics of the programming language. I was learning Python. And yeah, in the first 2 weeks, I met with my mentor, John McDonald. I don't think he's here, but what? Oh, you are. Hi. So he's back there. I didn't see you. So I had my first meeting with him, and what I can remember from that was I figured out how I learned how to make, I made my first program essentially. It's not the game, but it was just a very simple beginner program that everyone does when they start learning a language. And so it'd be I'd type in a keyword and it'd give me one little response or whatever. And that was what I did. And then I kept on learning the basics of Python through YouTube videos, a book, online articles, and other things like that until the 28th of February. I had my second meeting with John, and that was when we started working on the code for the game. As far as I can remember, I don't think I got very much done in that meeting, but I still got a start on it, which felt good. It was I don't know how many lines it was, but there are 90 lines of code in total in the game, so it wasn't much. In December, I started learning how to make a program interact with the user more.
than just like one keyword. It could have like multiple keywords. It could have like multiple answers, that kind of thing. I really didn't understand what I was doing at that point, but it doesn't matter because I understand now, so, you know. I had another meeting with John. I didn't take a note on when it was, but I got like a very big chunk of the game code done, I think. It was probably like 2/3 or 3/4 of the code, so that felt nice. And then he told me to start working on these things called world data files. So what essentially a world data file is it's a bunch of text files that I have. Because as you'll see when I present, it's not up there right now, but when I present, there's gonna be like all this text in the game. And without the world data files, you wouldn't see that text. All you would see is the death message whenever you tried to type something in. So what the world data files essentially do is they are text files that I wrote all this stuff in, and then there's like, it's probably like 5 lines, no, it's probably more like 3 lines of code that says, all right, I'm gonna only look in this folder of files, and when the user enters in, like, say they wanna go west, the game will look at the movement system it has, and every world data file is coded, like, it's named with a, like, number, so spawn is named 03_03, and what the movement system will do is it says, all right, so if the user types in west, put in +0 +1, and it will find the file that is titled 0304 and print all that text out into the console. And so I just worked on those. And I worked on them for a while. I thought they were gonna not take that long, but it actually took me a while to just think of everything I wanted to put in my game. And I wanted everything to be like different from everything else, and it was like, I don't know, I just had a hard time thinking about it. In January, I admittedly took a bit of a break from my project for a couple weeks, but for the other couple weeks, all I did was work on the world data files, like think about what I wanted to do, and I wrote it down in there. Then in February, I finished up the remaining code I had left for the game, and I kept on working on my world data files. At that point, I was like messaging John through email probably almost every day. Just like I'd have like a question like, oh, would I do this, this, and this? And he'd be like, that's sort of correct, but you also need to do this and this. And I'd be like, okay. And I'd do that. And then finally in March, on the 1st of March, I finished my game. And this is my significant event for me from my whole project. This is like my favorite part because I stayed up till around midnight finishing this because I was just like, oh my God, I want to finish this so bad tonight. And I remember being super tired, but super excited that I was about to finish it. And then I remember sitting there for like 5 minutes on like the last line of text I had to put in. And I was like, oh my God, I'm about to finish it. And then I did it. And I was like, yay. And then I went to bed. Yeah. Some fun facts. I only have a couple, but fun facts about like computers. Most people, from what I can tell, think that like computers like really started being made during like the late 60s and early 70s, but the first computer was actually made in 1883 by Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace. It was not an electrical computer, it was mechanical. I think all it really did was like math and stuff, but that was interesting because I didn't know that. And then the first computer ever to come out that I found was the Apple I. And it came out in 1976 and originally sold for $666.66. Don't know why, but and on the resale market, a fully intact functioning one sold for around $400,000. So that's a lot. I definitely learned a lot. Oh yeah, and I forgot to point out, but here's the Apple one. It's like pretty old. In conclusion, I definitely learned a lot from this project. I made a game, which I'm super proud of. I kind of doubted that I actually would finish it, so I'm happy about that. I still see coding in the same way. It's got massive upsides for society and massive downsides for society. It really depends on the situation. I really didn't have any unanswered questions that were about my project, because if I could not find the answer on any website, I'd ask John, and he'd be like, oh, you got to do this. I was like, okay. Yeah, and I would like to thank my mentor, John, my teacher, Mr. Rule, my classmates, and my parents for supporting me through this project and helping me and that kind of thing. Yeah, and now we're gonna play the game actually. So how this is gonna work is it's gonna be up there, and you guys are I want you guys to read what is inside the little white lines. Whatever text is inside the little white lines in there is what I want you to read. And then you can raise your hand to say which way you want to go, and I'll call on one of you, and you can say that, and then we can go that way. And yeah, now I'm just waiting. So essentially, whatever is inside of those little white dotted lines is what you read. I could. All right. All right. It says, "Welcome to my game. The goal is to defeat the dragon by guessing the correct direction to fight it from. You can also explore the 5x5 world I've put a lot of thought into. Have fun." The exits are to the north, south, east, and west. Alright, so this is the spawn description. On this square of the world, there's a pile of leaves, a box, and some little weeds poking through lush grass. To the west, there is a little apple tree. That is all. Beyond that, there is a massive dragon. To the east, there are some snowy hills littered with twig-like trees. To the north, there is a big boulder with some red and yellow flowers. To the south, there are two male deer eating some dandelions that are peeking up through the thick moss. You. Deer is south. And so now you'll see, it's not popping up. Is it? Alright, to the west there is a crystal clear lake with sandy beaches surrounding it. To the east there's an apple orchard with deer eating apples off the ground. To the north there's a pile of leaves, a box, and some little weeds poking through lush grass. And to the south there's a valley that looks straight out of The Hobbit with green mossy grass and willow trees next to a small pond. You back there? All right. I guess so. It's just gonna take a while to pop up. It doesn't normally do this. All right. To the west, there is an island in a lake with warm turquoise crystal clear water. To the east, there is a desert with a little stone wall in the northwest corner. To the north, there are 2 male deer eating some dandelions that are peeking up through the thick moss. To the south, there is void. And so if you go south again, it will be game over because you fall into the void.
So we'll just stop it there because we can go all night, right?
All right. Yeah, you could. There's a lot.
He didn't stay for any questions. August.
What? Oh,
No questions.
All right. Yeah, questions. Yeah, back there. Yeah, it's a one. You have a 1 in 3 chance, so, you know, it's pretty easy. Any others? Yeah, you back there. It's the same because writing an algorithm for it to change every time is pretty hard, and I didn't have that kind of time, so yeah. Anybody else?
Can you just explain how you set it up in the grid?
The grid? All right, so there's this like 5 by 5 grid that you have and each little square is on the grid. And I kind of already explained this, but when you're going west, it goes +0, +1. When you're going east, it goes +1, +0. North, it's like a whole thing. And so, and then like all the squares in between the 4 like directions are coded. So, like you've got the 4 directions here. So say this is like below spawn. This is like, I don't know, 04, 03. And if you go like 3 spaces over to the edge of the grid, it would be 04, 01. And so this would be 04, 02, and then this would be 04, 01, essentially. And so it's just a little grid like that. Anyone else? Yeah, Isaac? Yeah, I actually do plan on, I thought actually, this was yesterday after the presentations, I thought there could be a way to really easily add graphics. I'm not going to explain it, but I thought of a way that I could add graphics. Anybody else? Sure, Isaac. Well, I kind of already said this, but when I finished the game, it felt really nice, and yeah.
It was a family celebration too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I didn't ask for one, but there was.
Excellent. Here's my wonderful 8th grade class. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching from home. Good night.
Go.